Welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, John, and with me today are some very special guests. Should recognize, well, I mean, you should recognize both of them. I would think most of the people here, but from a previous stream, you recognize my good friend, Jared. And coming to my stream for the first time ever, I'm super psyched, is Amy. And thank you guys for coming. This is the Knights of Keira stream, as we've dubbed ourselves.
Oh, he has nice. I don't have anything.
This is technically a leather opener, an ice-shaped leather opener from Game of Thrones back in the day, but it's been repurposed. So.
I didn't have any. It probably seems scandalous that I don't have a Keira t-shirt, right?
I thought you were going to wear one to the stream. The fact that you're not was actually a little bit of a disappointment, John.
Okay, well, tell you what I have done. I am wearing Sanri's Queen of Love and Beauty shirt. So
nice.
There you go.
I think that that works for this.
You would want to wear her favor in a tourney, wouldn't you, John?
I would. Okay, so if it hasn't become obvious by now, today's stream is actually the first installment in a new series that I'm starting called Focus On, and today we're focusing on the one Keira Knightley. We're all big fans. They'll probably argue that I'm probably a bit...
You're our Lord Commander, John. Your love for her is paramount. I just have to say that right now. No one loves her more than John. And Jared and I would never claim that we did.
No. We follow our fearless leader.
Absolutely. To the death. You have my sword.
Why don't we start with you guys introducing yourselves and telling people what you're working on and what you do.
Go ahead, Amy.
Sure. Hi, I'm Amy. My blogging name and my Twitter name is Amy Blackfire. That's with an AE and then Blackfire with a Y. Luckily, John put the links in the description you guys can check out. I just started a blog that's about Chinese and non-Western imagery in A Song of Ice and Fire. I study Chinese literature, and I noticed no one was writing about anything but Western medievalism in Aswaf, and I thought that was very well saturated. And I wanted to kind of do my own thing. So my first essay is going to be on Demon Monkey, calling Tyrion a demon monkey, and how that relates to the Monkey King from Journey to the West, Sun Wukong. And so I'm hoping to have that out in 2 weeks. I'm giving myself a deadline because I've been, piddling here and there on it. Oh, thank you, Courtney. I love you. And so I'm hoping my second essay will either be on peaches in Aswaf or maybe the 5 forts as a Great Wall imagery as well. So that's what I'm working on. And I'm also a very, very loyal member and proud member of the Knights of Keira. So.
Awesome. So I'm Jared Kozel. I am a resident family medicine physician at the University of Connecticut. I'm not much of a hashtag content creator other than that. John just happens to be kind enough to invite me on to his streams and to listen to my kind of stream of consciousness that I have via my Twitter account, which is kind of my outlet for all this kind of stuff in terms of movies and discussions of the stories we love.
Yeah, don't sell yourself short, Jared. As far as I'm concerned, that is some great content that you put out there because you are such a positive voice for fandom, both with Star Wars and Game of Thrones. And I mean, it's how we met each other because I think we were both sort of exasperated in the aftermath of season 8 of Game of Thrones. And as you and I are both fans of the season, and that was not exactly a popular position to hold.
More popular than you might think.
Yeah, it is. But people were very vocal online, and it was nice to find someone that that we shared similar feelings on the season overall.
Absolutely, it was. We respect all opinions, but it's more fun to talk about things that you love. So that's what I try to do.
Yeah. And so you guys it's sort of been a joy getting to know both of you, and especially now that we have the Here Be Dragons Slack, we've been able to form sort of this unofficial fan club. Which
unofficial. I think we're very official, John.
Yeah, at this point we kind of are. We even have
a Twitter and everything.
Yeah.
We're just not officially endorsed by Keira Knightley. We need to put that legal
not yet.
Not yet. But yeah, we've been doing like watch parties and stuff, which has been great because, I mean, I think a lot of people in our circle can kind of appreciate this, that, you know, a lot of us are shy individuals. And so a lot of my movie watching over the years has been sort of, you know, the solitary. I go to the movies on my own. I check out the stuff I'd like to see. But the fact that we've all got to, you know, sit down and watch movies together in the group, with everything from the Keira movies to, you know, Star Wars stuff and, you know, and beyond that, it's been a lot of fun. And I've enjoyed getting to know everyone and especially you guys who have been able to make me feel slightly less crazy.
Nothing wrong with a little spark of madness.
Yeah.
Sanity is definitely it's a concept, you know, it's not really a structured thing that is even real. What is reality anyway? So how can we be sane?
Yeah, exactly. So let's start off just kind of each talking about how we came to, you know, discover Miss Knightley in the first place and how we became fans. Whichever one of you wants to go first is fine.
Jared, since I went first on the intro, you want to go ahead and take this one?
Sure. So the first time I ever saw Keira Knightley in a movie would be Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Of course, given the role that she played as the decoy queen, Sabe, I didn't necessarily recognize her or put a face to the name at that time. But I first really became aware of her in a few years later, around 2002, 2003. And specifically, the first time I remember seeing her was on the poster for Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl. And I was just, it was a beautiful poster. I was immediately struck by this striking young woman who I thought I'd never seen before. It turns out I actually had. But and there was her name right there on the poster, Keira Knightley. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm looking forward to seeing this. And I did, in fact, really love the movie. We'll be talking about that one and the entire series on this stream. And kind of right around the same time that I saw the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie, I also saw a movie that Keira had released a year earlier called Bend It Like Beckham, which was a very different role for her. But I loved that movie as well. And that kind of sparked things off to the point where I became more of yeah, there she is. She looks good. I'll throw that controversial opinion out there. But yeah,
I don't think that's strong enough of a word. She looks amazing.
Yeah, no, I'm a big sports fan as well, and in particular, I really enjoyed getting to see. I had just started to get into soccer, or football, as they call it over the pond, at that time, and it was a lot of fun to see Keira tackle a role like that, and that really kind of set things off to the point where I went on to discover other movies that I love, like Pride and Prejudice and Atonement, and others that we'll be discussing on the stream today.
Yeah, I actually technically saw her, like you, in that I saw her in The Phantom Menace. But I mean, you know, the paint, it was just, I didn't recognize her at all. So that was the first time I saw her. But the first time I noticed her, right, which I think is more important, is I actually went with a friend to see King Arthur in theaters. Because I like, you know, the Once and Future King. I was really into that kind of fantasy stuff. And so that was where I began to have a thing for women with bow and arrow, just hands down. I loved that and it's not necessarily about being masculine or martial, but you know, she was getting things done, right? And she was doing it herself. And I think that I really enjoyed that kind of confidence with the bow and arrow that she had. And I need to rewatch it because I don't even necessarily remember anything that happened in the movie because I was young. But all I remember was her presence on the screen and how it just completely outshined everyone else. And I told my friend, this is amazing. Who is this? And she said, that's Keira Knightley. You don't know who Keira Knightley is? And she said she's in Pirates, which I think had just come out the year before, if I'm not mistaken. And she had just gotten it on DVD, and everyone was freaking out about DVD at the time. Oh my God, this is great, better than VHS. And so she said, come over and we'll watch that. And so the next weekend, then I went over to her house and saw Pirates. And then I saw Keira in that again. And I just thought, I have to see anything I can with her in it. This is amazing because she just acts every scene so well. And she's just drop dead gorgeous every time she does it too. So, all actors are good looking unless you're trying to do, a different look, right? So that's a given, but she shines also for her acting skills. And I think that it's really hard. It's really rare to find someone that's that good looking and also just insanely talented.
Yeah, I just want to take a moment real quick to say hi to someone who I don't recognize from the usual chats, which is Nicole here. Thank you for showing up. Courtney, it was Pirates for me too, although that was like the first stepping stone because that's when the first time that I saw her in anything. And I do remember it was funny because when the previews for that were coming out, a lot of people were like, oh yeah, Natalie Portman is in the Pirates of the Caribbean movie. Which is so funny because, of course, she plays Natalie Portman's double in The Phantom Menace. So, and I don't even know how many people knew that consciously, but it just sort of carried over. And even today, like Sandry is always joking in the chats, they're the same person. Prove me wrong. Which is great.
We love them both here, so
yes.
No need for division on that front.
Yeah, there's no need to pit beautiful women against each other. Let's appreciate them both.
Yeah, but so I did see Keira for the first time in the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie, and I think it's really interesting the way she first appears in that, because the movie starts with a flashback with a young Elizabeth Swann, and then it cuts to Keira opening her eyes, and the camera pulls out. I actually sort of wonder if that's why. Okay, I'm getting a little obvious in my adoration here, but I do wonder if that's what is so magnetic about her eyes. Maybe that the first time I ever saw her was that amazing shot of the camera pulling out from her eyes, because her eyes are very expressive. Especially, I was just watching Pride and Prejudice the other day, and I was remarking upon how she acts with her eyes a lot, especially in that film.
Yes,
absolutely. And that's a part of her just being brilliant. And I think there's also that scene in Anna Karenina, right, where she looks up at the fireworks. Am I remembering the right movie? Yeah. And the fireworks are kind of gleaming in her eyes, and her smile. She smiled with her eyes. It's crazy how she does it. It's insane. It's really, really good.
But obviously, even though that's the first time I saw her, it was Pride and Prejudice, where I just sort of, okay, let me just come out and say it, I fell head over heels, because she's phenomenal in that. But also, and it wasn't, I don't think it was just Keira herself, but it's her performance in that film. And the fact that I think what makes Pride and Prejudice such a successful film is that you really do fall in love with Elizabeth Bennet alongside Mr. Darcy. And so that's what, for me, made not just the film enjoyable to watch, but you can, in that way, identify with Darcy, but also be excited with Elizabeth as she's, as the two of them gradually discover their love for each other. I mean, there's that scene towards the end of, at the end of the film, where she's describing, their love for each other to her father, and she's just overcome with, almost giddiness. And I remember that's how I felt watching that scene. And I kind of credit that as being the moment where everything turned for me in terms of the types of movies I watch, and and how I allowed myself to kind of open up to movies in general. I mean, I kind of always wore my heart on my sleeve, even growing up, but I think that was the point where I was like, you know what, I'm weeping at this, and I don't care who knows it. So, so I was sort of all in at that point, and that made it to where I wanted to seek out like all of her movies after that, because I was definitely a big time fan after that movie.
Yeah, we could talk about that movie for hours, and we did. There's a 2.5 hour discussion on John's channel for those of you who haven't seen it, as proof of our adoration of that movie.
But that said, Amy did not get to speak on that stream, so I'm going to give the floor over to her as to what she might want to talk about with Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah, I think one of the things that first got me was it's a little bit of at first it felt like a cliche. Of course, you hate each other and then later discover that you like each other, right? So I thought it was going to be a little cheesy, honestly. And, it is. I mean, but it is Jane Austen, so she has some really substantive storytelling, right? So I gave it a shot, so I kept watching. And I think especially the scene where it's raining and they're basically having a fight and kind of yelling at each other, but then they get really close. and I was on the edge of my seat going, kiss, kiss, kiss. So that's when I realized I was into the movie, right? And I was into them getting together, even though at first I thought it was kind of a cliche of you don't get along when you first meet, but then later, you get together. But you also kind of realize that he's being held back a lot by his family, but he's also being held back by his own basically lack of social skills. Really, he's not a, I'm an extrovert, so I can't relate. But when he's at the party on the side, not wanting to dance, at first you go, wow, what a jerk. He's just a butthole, right? But then you get to realize that no, he's just a very shy man, and he's worried about, right? I think he a couple times asked, she mentions laughing at him, like, oh, we should laugh at him. And the look he gives is like, that's the worst thing you could do, right? And he also says the worst thing you could do is betray his trust, right? He says that once you lose his trust, it's gone forever is basically what he says. And so he's actually a man that's very emotionally invested in relationships, actually to the point where, one thing it seems like, he will end it there, right? So he actually he puts a lot of emotions into things, so much so that he puts walls up because he doesn't want to get into relationships in the first place. Yes, Kate, I will be your seeing eye dog, but an extrovert. You can just take me around.
Yeah, I think everybody needs Amy as their extrovert. We actually talked about this because I could perfectly sympathize with Darcy, and I think that's why, especially Matthew McFadden's performance in this film.
Yeah.
It's just he plays Darcy as someone who is just very uneasy around people, and that's sort of a struggle that he goes through. But he gradually takes her advice when she even, he says to her, "I do not have the talent of easily conversing with people I've never met before." Dear God, can I sympathize with that? And then she says, "Perhaps you should practice." And then the very next time he sees her, beyond the situation, he's outgoing with her relatives, and so it shows that growth. And I also love that, Pride and Prejudice is sort of painted as a story of they can't stand each other, when they first meet. But if you watch Darcy in that opening scene at the dance hall, the way he looks at her as she's out there on the dance floor, it's obvious that he immediately is just entranced by her, which, I can't relate to that at all.
Well, and the fact that there's so much misunderstanding between them, right? When she finally finds out that he's not the jerk she thought he was, that's really when they can, because I really obviously related to Lizzie, luckily my mom wasn't like Lizzie's trying to get me to get with you, and so, but this kind of, wanting to dance and having a good time and seeing a cute guy and wanting him to dance with you, and then when he rejects you, I mean, especially if you look like Keira Knightley, like, what the hell is wrong with you? Why did you want to dance with me? But it turns into really her discovering his personality, and really then him discovering hers, and realizing that like her wittiness is exactly kind of how I flirt. Basically, I kind of give guys a hard time, right? And so her kind of wittiness throughout the movie, seems like in such contrast with him. But when they finally really get to know each other, they realize that they're actually very compatible. And I think, so it's not necessarily that she hates him and then realizes she loves him. It's more that at first she thinks they're absolutely incompatible. And the family freaks out. Like, I thought she didn't like him, right? Later, when she comes out and says she likes him. So it's really more of a story of what was perceived as incompatibility, and then you learn later there was just a lot of things that needed to be worked out, misunderstandings, and they were actually quite compatible. So, and loved each other.
Yeah, so she was drawn to him from the first. You could tell that, and that's why she was so hurt when he makes his kind of off the cuff, awkward, admittedly kind of cruel comment, and that's when she goes back and met him with the line about the dancing and how that you should do that even if your partner is barely tolerable. And I mentioned that on the original Pride and Prejudice stream, that was the moment when I was watching that movie that I specifically fell in love with Elizabeth Bennet, the character, because that was my introduction to it. Before I had read the book or seen the BBC miniseries, I already loved Keira Knightley, but that was the moment where she kind of disappeared into the character for me and kind of opened up the entire story.
Yeah, Anna might say a comment that Keira's way too pretty to play Elizabeth.
No such thing.
They kept saying that her older sister was so gorgeous. I'm like, yeah, she's a good-looking blonde, but have you seen Keira? So I kind of get what Anna's saying, in that it seems like the lines were written as if Keira was the second best-looking Bennet sister. And that's not possible if you have Keira Knightley.
Well, as a matter of fact, when Joe Wright first met her for the role, he even said, I don't think he said this point blank to her, but he was like, she's far too pretty to play this role. But then apparently she came to the audition really dressed down, and he said, no, she's fine.
It's just Hollywood standard.
Yeah.
You could argue, Jennifer Ely's a beautiful woman too. You could certainly say that she is too pretty to be Elizabeth Bennet as well. But what matters is the performance and what they both bring to that role.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to escape that with any Hollywood production. Most of the people involved are going to be gorgeous people, because that's just kind of the way the movie business operates. But speaking of Jennifer Ely, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention. I'm sure everybody in the chat knows this, because we're all Song of Ice and Fire fandom, or most of us. She did actually play the original Catelyn Stark in the Game of Thrones pilot. Just as a side note, but
and the original Daenerys is in Pride and Prejudice as well.
Yes. Darcy's sister is the actress.
Anna's comment about Gone Girl is really funny, by the way, John, if you want to throw that up, because I felt the same way when I saw her in Gone Girl.
You mean Rosamund Pike? Yeah, that was an eye opener when she played Amy Dunn in Gone Girl. Sweet little Jane Bennett. No, she couldn't kill her husband like that.
I know. And the fact that her name was Amy too. I was like, I was watching it. So someone's gonna think I'm a psycho, just like this Amy.
Yeah, I actually haven't seen Gone Girl.
John, you have to see it.
That's one of those that I strangely missed. Okay. I have no idea why.
It's really good.
Yeah, I think what it is some years I go through my phases of being angry at the Oscars, and so some of the movies that are up for awards contention, I'm like, no, I'm not going to see that just because people say it's great. But anyway, so yeah, was there anything else you wanted to comment on, Amy, for Pride and Prejudice?
No, I think I'm good. I like to just talk about the costume dramas as a whole too. So if there was another costume drama you wanted to talk about, because those are my favorite, hands down, of her movies. But I mean, which one is the question? Because they're all wonderful. So do you guys want to talk about? Because there's the Duchess, there's Anna and Colette. One of those.
Well, I have a question. Have you seen Atonement, Amy? Or is that one
That's
you
the one that I have not seen. So
okay, let's
yeah.
hold off on that for the moment.
I told you I'm not a baby about spoilers. You guys can talk about whatever you want to talk about. I really don't care.
I definitely want to talk about it, but I'm gonna hold off for a second just because you know, you mentioned when you talk about costume dramas, and I know you're dying to talk about the Duchess. So
yes.
So let's go ahead and move on there.
Duchess. I love the Duchess. It is still my favorite, even after seeing some of the newer movies. Colette almost took it. But the Duchess is still, I think, because what I admire a lot about the Duchess obviously is the costuming. I mean, it's some of the best dresses. Yes, that's the exact dress I was going to talk about, John. This kind of golden with a little bit of I would say a little bit of an earthy green, right? And how it matches her bouquet. And she, I think this, correct me if I'm wrong, John, but I think she also goes into his house for the first time as husband and wife in this dress as well, correct?
Yes, I believe so.
And this is the dress that he cuts off of her for their first sexual liaison. And speaking of that scene, though, where he does cut off her dress and they have intercourse for the first time, what I found really interesting is he was saying, "Oh, these dresses, you know, they're so complicated." And he says, "Well, men have so many ways to express themselves, and girls have their hats and dresses." And that one line, I think, encapsulates a lot of what the Duchess is trying to say, which is, you know, even though she was not giving him a son, otherwise she was absolutely doing her duties as a wife, and she was doing the best she could. And yet the limits on women, and we're playing a drinking game for patriarchy, so you can go ahead and drink. The patriarchy, right? The patriarchal controls that are put on women, the fact that he gets the kids, she cannot leave and take the kids. It is impossible, you know, until, you know, 50 or so years ago, it was almost a given that the guy gets the kids. So he was able, just like in Anna Karenina, right? The man is able to use the children and keep them a little bit and keep them away, from the woman who gave birth to them and who I'm sure loves them more. You know, you see the father in all these movies; they're never doing crap for the kids, right? So in the Duchess, right, he's paying more attention to 3 children because they're boys that aren't his own, rather than his, you know, daughters who he's supposed to love. So this kind of devaluing of female life and putting male life as the superior. And I think that the way that the people love her, right, the Duchess, and I think it was Bess that says, you know, her husband is the only person in all of the country that does not love his wife, right? Everyone loves the Duchess. And so one of my favorite costumes that she has is that her political costume. It kind of looks a little militaristic, kind of, you know, a little bit like a military uniform, makes her look stronger. And when she's in that persona, that's where I like her the most, because that's when she is the Duchess as a political actor, right? And she's more politically engaged than her husband. Her husband has all this power and doesn't do crap with it. He doesn't talk, you know, to all these other politicals. He just leaves the dinner, and she basically has to go in and salvage it, right? He seems, according to the movie, he seems to be a big player in the Whig Party, and yet, you know, everyone comes and they're hoping to get a word with him, and he just completely, you know, bails, and she has to be really the politician, even though he's the one with the political, you know, office and power. And so I think that it's showing how she has to adapt to the patriarchy, I think, is one of the best parts of the movie. And how she basically has to become a throuple. I mean, there really isn't another choice than for her to accept Bess there and to basically share a husband. And her infidelity, right, was absolutely unacceptable to him. And I think he even said when he found out about her affair that if she would have just been more discreet, it would have been fine. And I call absolute bullcrap on that. No, he was not okay with her being with anyone else, period. Women back then, and sometimes now, are expected to want monogamy and only monogamy. And the man, because of his, you know, I think it's this or Anna Karenina, where the man says, I have these urges, men have these urges, we can't do what you women can, you know?
It's Colette, where he says,
Colette,
we're the weaker sex.
We're the weaker sex. Yeah. You get everything. What do you mean? Yeah, and this kind of idea that a man can go to the pleasure quarters or have a mistress, and the wife must adapt. She must accept it or leave and not be the wife anymore. And it also showed in Anna Karenina that it's social suicide to do that. She does leave. So Colette makes Anna Karenina makes the decision to be with her lover, and she is ostracized by the community. And so in the Duchess, right, her character definitely sees that, and she's also in a much higher position as a Duchess. She knows that she can't just escape this marriage, right? And her mom says, you have two options. You either go back and accept it, or you write a strongly worded letter to your husband. And that encapsulates the choices that women had at that time. And sorry, my feminist rant is over.
No, bring it.
Yeah, no, I was just enjoying listening to that. Just to kind of build off what you were saying about that line early in the Duchess when Georgina, I forget how to pronounce it, basically says that, her hats and her dresses are their way of expression. Over the course of the movie, she finds other ways to express herself. As you said, she becomes involved in politics. She becomes a socialite. She becomes the life of the party. Those are some of the best scenes in the movie, and people love her for it. And the tragedy of that movie is that over time, her husband, fantastic performance by Ralph Fiennes, but God, is that guy a monster? He finds a way to take everything away from her. And specifically, one of the lines that really stood out to me was when she finds out that the Duke and Bess are having the affair, and she's heartbroken, not so much even that he had the affair, but that it was with Bess, and because she thought Bess was hers. And
of all
she was
the women
like,
in England, I think is what she said.
I think
why could you not leave me this?
That's one. I think she said the sole comfort in my marriage, which it was. Her and Bess were gal pals for life, and that broke my heart, because it really shows how relationships with men, especially back then, can really screw up your female friendships.
And that may just be Keira's best scene that she's ever performed, because just the rage that comes out and the pain as well. I do remember seeing the movie in theaters and just sitting there being like, holy crap. It's a hell of a performance and a really great scene. Absolutely.
And over the course of that movie, you see her slowly start to unravel to the point where, there's that absolutely heartbreaking scene when, after her husband has forced her to give up the child that she has with her lover, Charles Grey, and she has to go and hand him over to his family, not even to him, because they can't make him, he can't show up and be seen there with her. And you can just see how devastating it is for her. And the moment where she hands it over, and then she almost lunges because she wants to take her back, but she can't. And then she finally just has to kind of choke out, her name is Eliza. And then she has to turn away and basically collapse into Bess's arms, the woman who has taken her husband, essentially. Not that she loves her husband anymore, but it's everything has been taken from her at that point. She doesn't have her husband, as much as she hates him. She doesn't have her lover. She doesn't have one of her daughters anymore. She barely has the children that she does get to live with. And while she kind of reconciles with Bess, she never really gets to have that relationship with her again that she once thought was so special.
Yeah, it really does feel kind of, in a lot of ways, broken, kind of beyond repair. And I also think one thing that I found interesting is, he kind of says it outright. He says, I know what I'm able to give in this marriage, right? Kind of, just because you're honest about it being, philandering doesn't make it good. And what's interesting is also this kind of, this feeling of what you were right, Jared, and that she doesn't love her husband, so she doesn't necessarily want him. But in the end, he is her husband. And for a while, you could tell she just wanted him to love her and accept her and be the Dutch and Duchess together, right? Without, and have kind of what she growing up thought was, I'm sure growing up, when they talked about marriage, it was always monogamous. Her mom probably never mentioned, oh yeah, your husband's going to cheat on you all the time, by the way. That's something that women back then would just find out by, getting married. And there was this, men can get away with everything. And I think one of my favorite scenes in The Duchess is when she says, let's make a deal. You can be with Bess and I can be with my lover. And I believe he says, I have it written right here. Make a deal, right? why would I make a deal? I am in charge of it all. And that's once again, exactly the patriarchy right there, right? You can't negotiate with it as a woman necessarily, straightforward like that. So she has to go behind his back, right? And fool around anyway, because she has a passion for this man and she actually loves him and he cares about her and wants to be with her, right? Whereas the husband, like Beth said, is the only man in England that has not fallen in love with her. And you as an audience, I mean, how can you not fall in love with the Duchess along with them, right? So it seems absurd to a point of insulting that he's not into her, honestly.
I just want to say hi to Sanri. Did you bring your hose, Sanri?
We are very parched. It is true.
Yes.
No, it's a funny thing about watching the movie last night after I hadn't seen it in a while. I do remember back at the time that the film came out, there was a lot of talk about Ralph Fiennes' performance and how there's like an arc to his character and that by the end he's sort of turning around and there was a lot of commentary about how much dimension is added to the character, and that is true. But I really remarked last night though, like how infuriating it is that after everything that he does, he's decided at the end that things are going to be easier now, and it's infuriating, and I think I hate him even worse for that.
Yeah. No, I mean, Anna, I believe in the chat earlier, mentioned the rape scene, which is horrific in that
warning, if you want to watch The Duchess, by the way, as a survivor, I also want to say that if it does trigger you, skip past it or skip this movie because it does have a quite brutal marital rape scene.
Yeah. And I mean, the sad tragedy of it is, as John was pointing out, that she feels like she doesn't have anywhere to turn and she can't give anything up. Like there's a scene that I also really love in the movie where her lover basically comes to the house, Charles Gray, and is screaming at upstairs like let me see her. I don't care. I want to be with her. I don't care if our kids are boys or girls. And the husband basically sends her down to take care of it, and she does, because at this point, I mean, even her mother shows up as an ally of her husband to force her to go back, and she basically just kind of quietly has to say, think about what you're asking me to do, and leaving and taking, I would never see my children again. And that she finally breaks through to him there. And it's heartbreaking because you can tell that this is the last thing she wants, but it's her only recourse. And she, as powerful as she is, she really has nothing for herself.
And I think also the mother too is interesting because you also see that in Pride and Prejudice, where the mother's kind of perpetuating these patriarchal ideas of marriage and monogamy, and not for yourself, but not expecting it of your husband, these kinds of things.
Yeah, it is kind of gratifying though when she, there's the scene before she ends up returning where she even turns away her mother and she's like, no more of this. And, yeah, I'm going to live the life that I want to live, but unfortunately it's only a matter of time before she realizes that she can't live without her children. And so it's a heartbreaking decision. And as you were saying, Amy, we spoke about this last night, where it's the sort of reverse of the decision that Keira makes in Anna Karenina. And so that's a really interesting parallel to see that the one character decides to go ahead and make that sacrifice, and then how she's rewarded for that by society and what it does to her, and versus Georgiana, who knows that she's not going to be able to do that, and she won't be able to live without her children, and so she's then doomed to a life of just having to stand there by her husband and her husband's lover and find solace where she can.
And I think it's the ending. I know this sounds terrible, but it's the ending that this is the reason it's my favorite, definitely, of the costume dramas. And that's because in all of these movies, she has to make these hard decisions. And this one is, I think, the most realistic. That's what women would really have had to have done back then. You know, with Anna Karenina, sorry, spoiler alert, with throwing herself in front of a train, felt a little dramatic, you know? And so in this one, it's very straightforward. At that time, that this was what was going to have to happen. She was going to have to accept his mistress and live, you know. But what I really like is at the end when they have the titles kind of telling you what happened, and that Bess does become the next Duchess after her, right? If I'm not misremembering that. And I think that was nice because, you know, the mistress never gets the title. She's always just almost kind of used, right? And even though Bess kind of, I think, says straight out that she loves the Duke. He never really says whether he loves her or not necessarily. He might just enjoy having two women, you know? So for her to actually get the title, I also like that because finally, you know, she was working for it, basically. She was basically being his wife, you know? So it's good that she then got recognized after G died. Because I can never pronounce it right either, Jared, so I just call her G, like her husband does in the movie. So even though he's a terrible person.
And of course, I had misremembered. I thought it was mentioned in the subtitles at the end of the film, but I must have read it on like Wikipedia or something where, of course, once Bess became Duchess, he took another mistress because, of course.
Yeah, of course. That's the thing, is it's about having a principal wife, and you know, and I study Chinese culture, so you know, the emperor had a whole harem of concubines, you know, and it was just absolutely accepted. But then if the empress, you know, ever got a lover, it was a little scandalous because what if she gets pregnant with the lover's baby and not the emperor's baby? So there is also a natal aspect to this of you want to make sure that that son or daughter, you know, that heir, however you want to look at it, you know, is yours for sure. So there's this huge, believe it or not, in a patriarchal society, there's a huge control over women's bodies and when they reproduce and who is the father, right? And so a lot of this monogamy versus, you know, stepping out on your wife kind of thing is a lot about the wife absolutely having your heir. And there was only, back then, there were no DNA tests. There was only one way to guarantee that, and that is to make sure that no other men got around your wife, which is why in Chinese culture, in the imperial palace, eunuchs would take care of the concubines because then you could guarantee they would not get with your concubines. So,
unless they were Grey Worm and they figured out a way. But yeah,
there's always ways, man, I'm telling you.
Yeah, but I just wanted to touch on, since we were talking about these kind of transactional relationships, I did want to mention Bess, and specifically the reason that she ends up getting into the relationship with the Duke is because she is being denied the right to see her children by her own husband.
Yeah.
And that's why when finally G confronts Bess about this and is like furious with her and doesn't want anything to do with her, Bess is unapologetic. She's sorry that she hurt Georgina, but she is like, this is the only way I get to see my kids again because the Duke can make that happen. So she is willing to make that sacrifice. She is willing to burn her friendship with G just for the right to see her kids again. And what's heartbreaking is at the end of the film, G makes that same choice, essentially.
Yes. I think I love that because Jared, they actually had that back and forth where she said Kira's Kira's character says, there's a limit what you will do for your children. And she says, no, there's no limit at all. And then in the end of the movie, you can tell G feels the same way. There's no limit at all what she would give up for her children. And she gives up her happiness, essentially, to be with her children. And I think that's also another reason I like the ending, and that she, you know, in the end, she changed her priorities. She put her own happiness second, and she put her children first.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm surprised we haven't gotten a John sigh yet. We're this far in, and we haven't gotten one. We've already had to drink like 3 times for my patriarchy drinking game. But the John sigh drinking game,
I'm restraining myself.
I can tell you're really working hard, John. It must be terrible and really difficult.
Yeah, it's okay. Well, I know how to unleash the John side. Let me just sort of mention the beginning of the film, because, you know, we've been talking a lot about the end. What makes so much of the film so sad is especially since we see Keira's so happy in the opening of the film, and it's one of the few times that we sort of see this completely unburdened, joyous young girl, except perhaps maybe later in the film when she has some, brief time with Charles Grey. And of course, we know that's going to come crashing down. But the opening of the film is really great. And I did talk about this last night, where this was the first movie of hers that I saw where I didn't really have an excuse as to why I was going to see it. It was sort of just, okay, yeah, I'm a total Keira fanboy, and I'm going and I'm buying a ticket for the Duchess. So, and I do remember the movie opened, and I think it had been a little while since she had a movie out. So I was sitting there in the theater, and she appears on the screen, and she kind of turns around. And I did have that moment of, like, John sigh.
Your heart flutters a little bit. Yeah,
exactly.
Your stomach get a little butterflies in your stomach.
Yeah, and
I love that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jared.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying, not to bring it down, but you mentioned that opening where she feels so wild and, like, free. She's watching the man she loves, Charles Grey, race the other guys around the house and everything. And that is echoed at the end of the movie, where the Duke has that line where he is now looking out at the children as they're playing on the lawn, and he said, I forget his exact words, but it's something like, what a remarkable thing it is, to be free, or to see how free they are. And obviously all of G's freedoms has been taken from her at this point. So it's a cycle, but it's not a renewing cycle, it's a broken cycle.
I also think they're doing something with the costuming too, because she has this white dress and she seems so happy in the beginning, right? Yeah. And the clothes get a little bit darker, I think, in color throughout the movie. And what I really liked about that scene too is that you have this huge scene of happiness, and then a scene of uncertainty comes right after, right? She learns that she's going to be engaged to the Duke. I keep wanting to say the Dutch. That's not how it works. The Duke. And so you have this. She seemed kind of virginal and innocent in her white dress, right? And I assume her character is a virgin. And so you have this kind of adult. That's really technically when she becomes an adult. You can look at it like that. That's her coming of age, right? When she is officially belongs to a man rather than her father, right? So this is in Chinese, traditional Chinese culture as well, as you follow your father when you are a little girl, you follow your husband when you're a woman. And then if you are a widow, you follow your son or your nephew if you didn't have any boys. So there's, so she basically, it was kind of a ceremonial, even before the wedding, she was passed off essentially from her husband, from her father to her husband. And they never mention her father though in there, do they?
No, I don't.
That's the mom, and they never say anything about the dad. So I don't know if doesn't live with them.
They do mention he doesn't appear in the movie. They do mention, I believe she mentions early in the movie when she's having a conversation with her mother that she was expected. She was hoping that her husband would be revealed to have some kind of hidden warmth or depth, like her father did, under that stoic exterior. But I don't believe it's ever mentioned where the father is, or whether he's passed, or if he's somewhere else, like if he's abroad or anything. And I'll just mention Lady Leaf Underhill, if you're talking about who sent Charles Grey the invitation, I believe it was Bess. Yeah. Bess sent the invitation to bring Charles.
That was a part of them beginning to start to reconcile a little bit, right? She did something good for her friend, that would make her happy. So that was kind of the start of Bess and them. Bess trying to, offer an olive branch, really. I also like Anna's comment, talking about how he basically said, here's my bastard daughter. And Keira was pregnant at the time. Her character was, and say, here, you can practice your mothering skills, right? And Keira could have gone full on evil stepmother Cinderella style. But instead, right, that's what I'm saying is, other than giving a son, she did everything that a wife should have done. And so the fact that he, at one point, the Duke tells her, I've done all of my duties, but you haven't given me a son. And it's the exact opposite. She's done all of her duties, and other than nature, hasn't been able to give him a son, right? Whereas he has the authority to say he's doing all the things, but he's absolutely not.
Yeah, I mean, since we've come back around to that scene, it's so downright infuriating because you figure any person with any semblance of a soul, after G has sort of poured her heart out at that moment, just yelling out, "She is our sole comfort in our marriage. You have robbed me of my only friend." And then she says, sort of wanting to understand what's going on in his head, what is wrong with me, and you'd expect in that even the worst kind of person would, maybe tiptoe, tread carefully, maybe, but he is just so horrible and so blunt, and he just says, "As a husband I have fulfilled my duties, as a wife you have not." And it's like, dude, what the hell is
Any outside
wrong with
observer would not see it that way, other than the fact that she did not have sons, really. And really, the question I have is, if she had sons, would he have been happy? And I think the answer is no, because he wanted everything his way and how he wanted it. And the fact that she didn't have any sons that lived, I think she mentioned a couple of stillbirths in the movie, right? That was almost for him an excuse to discount her. But if she had done that, what possible complaint could he have? She was the perfect, at least political wife for him. The people loved her. If there were ratings back then, right? If they took polls, right, his approval rating would be through the roof, all because of her.
Yeah, politically, he didn't even, he didn't want to do anything, but he didn't have to do anything because she wielded so much power behind the scenes. And I love that first scene where you see her, voicing her political opinions to Mr. Fox, where she's talking about, freedom and how it needs to be absolute, and she's calling him on his BS, basically. And then, of course, there's the touch where after she comes back, after after her husband has left, and he says, "Was it the length of the speech that got to the Duke?" And she says, "No. As a matter of fact, he requested next time that it would be even longer."
I know. I love her wit, and her character, Elizabeth Bennet in Pride and Prejudice also had that, and she plays those characters so well. And I also think, talking about Charles Grey, her lover, if we could just talk about him for a second, he shows political prowess and interest. So I think what initially, if I were her, would I say, "Ooh, that's the guy for me"? What would have done it was that speech where he gave this rousing speech about a new time for England, and going into this new era bravely. And you can tell on her face that she goes, "This is a good speech. Like, this is rousing. He's actually passionate about politics," right? And so I think that's one of the first things that they really, they bond over. And then after the speech, he asks, how he did, and you can tell he was nervous and really into it. And that's when she realized, that wasn't him just performing. He really wants to, whether or not it's helping the people or not, he wants to be a politician. And her husband does not want to be a politician. And as a Duke, you have to be one, And so the fact that she would go for a lover that in many ways is the exact opposite of her husband really shows how incompatible, first off, the Duke and the Duchess really are, because she has such an interest in politics and he shows no interest at all.
I will say there's a moment right there after their conversation is great because they're both sort of shy and nervous about talking about their feelings with each other, where she says, "Do you think of me when we're not together?" And he responds, I forget the order of lines, but
you ought to know that I do.
Yes. And she says, "So you hesitated," and then he confesses that he was caught off guard and he's not used to being asked direct.
Yeah.
And it's just a great moment. And then even though it's followed by her discovery that her husband is cheating. "Oh, I'm seeing two of you, Jared. You just popped up in another window." Do you have a clone?
He might be switching over because he's frozen for.
He's frozen.
So he might be trying to get some. There we go. Yeah, trying to get some technical difficulties fixed there.
Okay, so it looks like Jared's having some issues. moving a little bit, Jared, but Jared,
Okay. Can you see me now?
yeah, there you are.
Yeah, your audio is lagging a little bit.
Okay.
But
Sorry.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry, I missed the past couple minutes of the discussion. So if I hope it carried on without me and that I wasn't too much of a distraction as I was blinking in and out of existence there. Where were you guys when what was the last point you guys had just made?
We were just talking about when G and Charles are talking about their feelings for each other after the speech, and you do keep freezing up a little bit, Jared. Just so you know.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the issue is on my end with the internet connection. So.
All right. Well, I'm
Yeah.
gonna do the mid-roll in a minute anyway, so hopefully maybe everything will get ironed out while we're doing that. But I will say that there's a moment in between, that conversation and when G discovers that her husband is being unfaithful, that she's sort of running back into the through the house, and she's just looked so alive and she's so excited, and it's a joy to see, even though, as with all moments in this movie where she's happy, it's about to take a nosedive. But I do really love that moment from her, because it's an excitement that she hasn't felt for a long while. So it's really great. Before we hit the mid-roll, any more thoughts on the Duchess?
I think maybe.
No, I just.
Sorry, go ahead, Jared.
No, I was just going to say, yeah. So I really do love this movie, even though it had been a while since I had seen it, and it is quite sad and tragic. But I do think that.
Oh,
darn.
Shoot.
Do you want to?
Sorry, guys.
Do you want me to go ahead and make my point, John, right now while he's figuring that
go
out?
ahead. Jared, if you do you want to try to maybe log out of StreamYard and maybe jump back in, see if that'll do it.
Okay. I don't know how much of that you guys got, but
none of it, Jared.
Yeah. No, I was just saying that I thought the Duchess was one of Keira's best all-around performances, in terms of the range she has and the emotion she gets to display. So that was all. Should I log out of the studio and come back to see if that might fix things? Because I'm pretty sure the issue is on my end, but if it's the internet, I can't do anything about it. So.
Well, you seem pretty good right now.
Okay, we'll leave it then.
Yeah.
We'll try it.
I was just going to make an overall point about party scenes and costume dramas. And there's always something that's going to go down at the party, right? And so, for the Duchess, it was when she came back from having her child out of wedlock, right? Then they have this welcome back party and there's all this pressure on her. It's a very public image to go to these parties. And so I think that really the party scenes in Pride and Prejudice and in Colette and really all of these costume dramas, that's always where a lot of the main tension kind of comes from. And of course, you get to see just amazing costuming in these party scenes too. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. You have really heavy kind of plot points, but then you also have this just, the set and the costume. They really get to go all out for these kinds of movies as far as flamboyant, because they're really wanting to show also how rich, the Duke is and how he can really throw these crazy, crazy shindigs. So yeah, I just, when you're watching costume dramas, always take really good note of the party scenes because they really affect the rest of the movie overall.
Yeah, I did love, talking about her political savvy. Every time we went to one of these party scenes, you saw her engaging with Mr. Fox, and then I don't remember the other guy's name, but she was always, they were always excited to see her. And she was always sort of pressing specific points with them. So it really did a great job to show that even as she was suffering in her personal life, she was really doing a lot in the political realm.
And when she did really have a breakdown, it was at a party scene, right? When her hair caught on fire. So it's always, that's when you're having these huge public things, you know, and if you're having crushing things happen in your personal life, how can it not bleed over, you know? So she doesn't let it bleed over in every scene except for that one. And that really shows how strong her character G is, you know, and that she really wants to present herself as the Duchess, even if inside she feels like a weak little girl.
Yeah, I mean, there's that whole section is tragic because it's, you know, coming after, you know, the horrible rape scene, but at the same time there's also an element of it that's ludicrous because her wig is catching on fire, and it's just, I mean, those wigs, I have to admit, they're something. Because they're huge.
And she's also drunk in that scene, by the way. So she doesn't just set her hair on fire all the time. She was drinking to excess because of her pain for her husband, taking advantage of her, basically. And back then, it would not have been considered rape. Marital rape was not a thing. So there was no one that she could go to. Anyone she talked to would have said, well, that's his rights as a husband. So she felt very, very alone. And so, of course, she would be in her cups about that.
Yeah, and it is worth noting that it is the rape that ultimately produces the son that the Duke wants so badly. But and afterwards, you know, there's that scene where he basically writes her a check and is like, "Now you have fulfilled your obligations," and you can just tell that, like, you know, she is so irrevocably broken with him at that point that. Even that little gesture means absolutely nothing to her, as it should.
Yeah, I really do want to mention that there's a line that is just so enraging, which comes in the confrontation scene after she's gone to the city of Bath with Grey, and her husband and her mother come, and she says, "You're going to tear my clothes off and force yourself on me." And he says, "Why on earth would I do that?"
Because you've done it before.
Yeah,
that is the most infuriating line in that scene.
And it's because he's done that, and he's got his son. He has what he needs, so he would view that as, you know, not even worth his time.
I also saw it as gaslighting her a little bit, in my opinion, too. A little bit of kind of sanitizing their personal history a little bit, too. Like, oh, that was just that one time. No, if you do it once, you are a rapist for life, you know? Even if you never do it again. And so I think this kind of idea that he can just pretend like that's not a part of his personality when it absolutely is, I think is what enrages me the most, is that he seems to basically be saying, oh, I'm just an asshole, like the whole movie, and yet is surprised when she treats him like he's an asshole. You know, you've proven yourself to be like that.
And then, of course, there's that line where G says, you know, about Charles Grey, he loves me, and her mother goes, so does William. And then he goes, I do. It's like, and she responds with, how? And and the audience is asking the same thing. It's like, how could you possibly say that? It's just, there is nothing about his character that isn't absolutely enraging. And, you know, kudos to Ray Fiennes, because he plays that role to a T, but it's just so frustrating and horrible to watch. And again, it's funny how I evaluated that final scene on this viewing in terms of, and probably a lot of how sort of I was younger when I saw it back in 2008, and also maybe less aware of things, and it's like, no, this moment of sort of self-reflection at the end does not make you a better person in the least bit. You are deciding for her that none of the stuff I did in the past matters now. I'm deciding we'll have an easier life now. And it's just so, you just hate him so much. He's the worst.
And even when he starts out a conversation where you think he's going to admit fault, he says, I know I haven't been the most understanding husband, something like that. And then the next 15 sentences are just him saying what she's doing wrong and how, how it's not good, and
his line there is, I know I have acted in ways over the years that you have judged harshly.
Which means I'm sorry you took it that way, not I'm sorry that I am that way, right? It's like saying I'm sorry you were offended by that thing I said, right? Intention doesn't matter in this case. What he intended, it doesn't matter. Her feelings are what matters, and her trauma and how she was hurt is what matters. So it doesn't matter if he didn't really mean to. That doesn't a guy can't just go, sorry, I didn't mean to, and it's okay, But like he said, I don't have to make a deal. Why would I? I'm in charge of it all. And I think that one line, if you just keep that in the back of your mind, every scene that you see her husband, you'll understand that everything he does is purely selfish and for his own satisfaction, and his own desires, and never about what's good for the party, right? The Whig party, or what's good for his family, or what's good for the country. It's about the Duke basically getting it on with any girl he wants. That's what it's about. So.
Okay, so if we're all done talking about this film, I'll go ahead and do the mid-roll right now, because even though it might, I call it the mid-roll, but I have a feeling that this may go on a little longer than usual today, but we'll still do it now.
I'm going to go see if I can fix my internet while you're doing the mid-roll, and then
okay.
Yeah, and I'm going to just take a quick break too, so.
Oh, okay. Oh,
yeah,
wow.
I'll be right back.
They're totally abandoning me, guys. They're, but at least I can talk about other stuff, so I don't completely embarrass myself. So next week we're going to be doing a stream on the film from last year, Little Women, Greta Gerwig's version, which was my favorite film of the year, and Amy is going to be back for that. And also, we're going to be joined by John B., who a lot of you know as Bronte. It was his favorite film too, so we're going to have a lot of fun talking about that. And then the week after that, I'm going to be doing a very special Tolkien-related stream with some very special guests. I'm going to hold that a secret for now as to who exactly is coming, but I think you guys will be really pleased with that. So if you're any kind of Tolkien fan, you're going to want to make sure that you come for that. Aside from that, I'm going to be having some updates to this channel hopefully in the coming weeks. A couple different things. I'm going to, again, hold that for a surprise, but I'm looking forward to that. So just stay tuned for some developments with the channel overall. And yeah, okay, there you guys. Whew, okay, so I was just telling everybody, Amy, that you're going to be back next week because we're going to be talking about Little Women with our friend John.
And I saw it in theaters with the feminist mother that raised me to be a feminist. So we were just loving that movie. We went to dinner afterwards and talked about it the whole time. So I'm very excited. I'm going to do a rewatch sometime this week so that I can take notes and refresh some things. But there are certain moments that for me are very memorable in that movie, and I'm really excited to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, I was head over heels in love with it. I knew as soon as I saw it in theaters, I was like, this is my favorite movie of the year, full stop. So
it's excellent.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Sorry we left you without an audience.
Did you see Detective Pikachu though, John? I saw it the night it opened. I got a free Pokemon card and everything.
I have to say, I missed that one, but shame on me. I need to get on that.
It's good cinematic quality,
Because clearly my top 10 list of the year is not complete without that. So
yes.
So I'll have to fix that. Oh, Kate is asking if there's going to be a watch party for Little Women. Sadly, it's not available on any streaming services. I mean, maybe we can do it on Cast, but I have to see if I can work that out. It proved to be a bit more difficult and a bit more cumbersome than I would have liked. So we'll see. But regardless, I recommend that everybody see it because it's, for me, it was the best film of the year. Greta Gerwig just knocked it out of the park, and it was shameful that she was not nominated for Best Director. I just want to say that. So yeah, anything else you guys want to throw out there that maybe you didn't mention in the beginning before we go back?
No, I think we covered the Duchess pretty well, so I'm ready to move on to whatever you think that we should discuss next.
Okay. Let's this will be more so you and me, Jared. Let's jump back to Atonement, because this is a really special one for me, because this came almost right after Pride and Prejudice. It was, again, a Joe Wright, Keira Knightley collaboration. And so after Pride and Prejudice came out, I was just jumping at the chance to when I found out that they were doing another project, I was like, yeah, I got to see that. That's going to be great. And I remember there was an early teaser out for it, which I don't think has ever been officially like put out as like a high quality trailer. I still have the link on my computer, but it's like super low quality from, all the way back when it came out. But anyway, point being, I remember seeing that preview for the movie and I was like, this looks fantastic. And so I actually ended up buying the book and buying the soundtrack, which came out in the UK a couple months before it did in the US. And so I had this sort of build up to it. It was like I was anticipating like a summer blockbuster or something. And so by the time I saw it, I was already fully in, and because I had fallen in love with the story overall. And it's hard to think now that this was the big breakthrough for Saoirse Ronan, because she's such a big deal now and she's such an accomplished actress. But even in this role where she was nominated for an Oscar, she just knocks it out of the park. I think Keira even said she was amazed by how fantastic she was out of the gate.
Yeah, no, I mean, she really, Atonement, well, this is a Keira Knightley stream. Atonement is really the movie. Bryony is the main character, and we see her through the three stages of her life, played by Saoirse Ronan, Romola Garai, I believe, and Vanessa Redgrave. And Keira, she plays Bryony's older sister, Cecilia, and she, in this role, her job is really to kind of be there as Bryony's entry point into the adult world, because Bryony is seeing what's going on between her sister Cecilia and Robbie, the handyman played by James McAvoy, and the entire early part of the foundational idea of the movie is that Bryony believes she understands what's going on, but she doesn't. So she sees Cecilia as her older sister, but she doesn't really understand what's going on between her and Robbie, who Bryony also has a crush on. And that ends up motivating what the inciting incident of the movie is. Just for those who haven't seen it, it's basically that Bryony walks in on Cecilia, played by Keira, and Robbie, played by James McAvoy, having sex. She does not understand what she's seeing. So later, when she comes to believe that Robbie may have raped her sister. And then later, when another rape occurs that is actually perpetuated by Paul Marshall, a character played by Benedict Cumberbatch, playing evil for once, he actually, she ends up providing the evidence, such as it is, that sends Robbie to prison, basically tearing apart Cecilia and Robbie just at the time when they had expressed their love together and come together. And Bryony ultimately comes to realize that what she did, she was mistaken, what she did was wrong. But by then, she has caused irreversible damage. And the entire, because Robbie has been imprisoned, ultimately he's drafted and forced to go fight in World War II. And Cecilia basically breaks off all connection with Bryony and her family and tries to devote herself to the war effort in the hopes that, as a nurse, in the hopes that she and Robbie can be together again one day. And it turns out that Amy, you said you weren't conscious about spoilers, so I'll just put this out there. I'm not sure even if I tried.
I do want to avoid explicit details, but we'll just say it ends tragically.
Yeah, it's
what a surprise!
It's a tragic end, but the thing is, it's presented in such a way that makes that tragedy even more of a gut punch, because you think that you have the happy ending given to you, and then it's taken away, and then it's given back, but in a way that is both more meaningful, but can never really replace what was lost. So
yeah, it's really a movie that it's sort of about storytelling and the power of story, and so there's an element of Bryony is writing. Bryony is an author, and so we're getting actually her interpretation, if you will, of events, and so that factors into the ending of of what we think we're getting and what actually occurred, and then the story that she chooses to tell in the end. But the ending, you're absolutely right, Jared. It's a gut punch, and I still remember walking. I mean, I had read the book beforehand, but the movie is just, it's the power of cinema where you can feel things much more deeply. And yet there's a moment at the end of the film where we're allowed to visually see the ending that Bryony is choosing to present to the world. And in a way, it's both really sad because it's not the truth, but also in a way comforting because we get to see it, even if it's not real. So it is a really beautiful film, and Keira is actually really great in this because it's a very different performance from Elizabeth Bennet. She's playing this, especially in the beginning of the film, this upper class, young woman who's got a, kind of a chip on her shoulder with the way she interacts with, people of lower status than her. But what I've always loved about the story is the way that the feelings between her and Robbie, gradually unfold until you get to that scene in the library where it's just, one of the purest expressions of just love, where they both realize the depth of their affections for each other in that moment. And it's one of the most simplistic and beautiful moments where, they're making love and they just say to one another, "I love you," one after the other. And it's a really beautiful moment. And of course, you have to see it, Amy, because Keira has this absolutely magnificent green dress, which is practically legendary.
Green's my favorite color too, so you don't know how happy you've made me. I'm definitely gonna watch it.
It's iconic.
Oh, it's gorgeous. Oh my gosh. Oh, and within a backless one too. That is so pretty. I mean, she looks good in everything, but some of the things they put her in these movies, though, are just absolutely spectacular.
Yeah, this is kind of an interesting blend because, well, you know, it's a period piece. It's not the lavish period piece that we've been talking about with the Duchess, or even the kind of more like earthy but still like 18th century period piece that we were discussing with Pride and Prejudice. This takes place right before World War II and extends into World War II, so it's becoming more modern. And for the most part, Keira's costumes, especially later in the film, are quite functional. But especially early, there are a few scenes, like there's a scene with her and James McAvoy's character by a fountain, where her clothes really become an important part of the scene there as well. And then, of course, the iconic green dress that we've been describing, which plays into both the beauty of the scene that John was describing, where they're making love in the library, and also the tragedy where you get this absolutely hauntingly beautiful shot when Robbie comes up and sees Cecilia standing in her green dress, and that's the image he has of her right before the police come to arrest him for a crime that he did not commit, and he ultimately has to carry that image of her forward.
That scene is so sad to watch, because when he's, you know, coming up to see her, it's like, you know, he's found, you know, the boys who have run away, and, you know, he thinks he's coming back up to the house as, you know, the hero of the moment, only to be greeted with this horrible accusation. And the look of sort of, you know, he comes up to the house, he has a smile on his face, and then it turns into sort of confusion when everybody's looking at him. And it's just horrible. You know, this poor guy who did absolutely nothing wrong, and then he has to, you know, go through so much the rest of the film, and yeah, it's.
Yeah. And the movie plays with perception, because there are several scenes where we see the scene first from Bryony's perspective, and it comes across as often misleading, very misleading, because we see Cecilia and Robbie in these situations that Bryony doesn't understand, so she interprets them very differently. And then the film will cut back, and it will show us what actually happened between Robbie and Cecilia, and it shows them, their dynamic, you know, which is actually, you know, it's tense at first, but it's tense because there's such a depth of unspoken feeling between them, and that kind of builds up until you get that scene in the library where they just let that passion out, and it feels like this tremendous release. And then you see Bryony come in, and that's immediately snatched away, because we don't know it yet, but they don't know it yet, but their lives are about to essentially be destroyed.
Yeah, and once again, talking about, you know, seeing it through Bryony's eyes, we see the library moment as well, first through her eyes, where yes, she, you know, comes into the room and she just sees them, you know, up against, you know, the bookcase, and then we cut back and we see what's led up to that moment. But yeah, it's another thing I want to mention, because I actually didn't mention it when we were talking about Pride and Prejudice earlier, which was the music by Dario Marianelli, who did all three of the Joe Wright, Keira Knightley movies. And it's especially wonderful in this film because he uses the typewriter along with the musical instruments, because of course, you know, Bryony is constantly, you know, typing away as a writer, and it adds sort of this propulsive, you know, energy to the scenes, where it helps with the editing, where it's just sort of adding the level of sort of almost stress to the scene.
Yeah, this is the score that he won his Oscar for. And that score really, you know, it's kind of a cliche to say that the score is a character, and I wouldn't necessarily say it's a character in this film, but as John said, it is a propulsive force. It is an engine, and the way it starts and stops kind of carries the audience with it as we are going through these scenes that can seem either sweeping and romantic, or jarring, or horrific, or sad and melancholy. And if you listen to the score just on its own, it can seem quite jarring, but when you pair it up against what the movie is telling you and what it's trying to tell you about perception and storytelling, it actually it complements it wonderfully. It's one of actually the best pairings of score and cinematic craft that I can think of, at least in that respect.
All right, thank you, Nessie, for chiming in. I was a bit worried for a second that something had gone wrong with the chat because I hadn't seen you guys in a little bit. Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
they're surprisingly quiet.
Yeah. Well, it's because Jared and I are doing most of the talking. When it goes back over to you, Amy, they'll be more.
We'll cede the floor to you as soon as we move away from this movie, which I could talk about forever, but we'll keep it short just because we want to include all of us in this discussion.
I don't mind. I love hearing you guys talk about it. It gets me pumped up for seeing it. So
I do want to say that scene in the at the fountain when they're walking down towards it, it's a great example of what Keira talked about this in one of her interviews about what Joe Wright wanted to do for this movie was the very sort of clipped English dialogue where they're constantly sort of shooting back and forth with each other, similar to that scene in Pride and Prejudice where Darcy and Elizabeth are talking in the rain, and to where it's this sort of really quick back and forth. And so again, as you say, when they get to the library, that's when the silence comes in, where the time of that sort of back and forth just stops, and all that's left is that passion between them. So yeah, but
and the passion, like, even though that's the last time that they really get to be intimate with one another, that passion, it endures. Like, there's the scenes later where they reunite in London before he ships out, and there is this absolutely like beautiful little moment where she reaches out and kind of touches his hand, and that's probably the first time he's been touched in years since he's been in prison, and it's almost every bit as intimate as the scene in the library, but it's restrained by necessity. And then they have to part where she basically, one of the refrains that Cecilia keeps whispering throughout the movie is "come back to me, come back to me, come back to me," and you hear it there. And then they show that she whispered it to him when he was being arrested. And then it comes back at the end. And it's really this kind of, desperate plea that's being put out into the universe. And you can it's a whisper. And you really feel like it's being heard because it's keeping Robbie alive, essentially, as he's fighting the war across the sea. But it eventually... It fades out and becomes, kind of more of a ghost than anything.
Yeah, and it's also, it's not just, come back to me in terms of, actually coming back to her, from, the war or, prison or anything, but also her bringing him sort of back, to, centering him basically. Because there's that scene which is actually... ends up being revealed as a fictional scene where they have the conversation with Bryony, and and he is just unleashing on her, which is, since Bryony has written the scene, it's actually her punishing herself through this exchange of dialogue where he's yelling at her, and he almost just lunges at her, and Cecilia grabs him and just holds him and says, "Come back to me." And she holds his face, and it's such a beautiful, heartbreaking moment. And and especially when we get to the end, and then we find out what actually happened and what actually didn't. It's devastating.
Okay, so I feel like we can move on and bring Amy back into the conversation, because, like I said,
I think there's some parallels a little bit with Anna with this question of point of view, right? Because in the ending, I thought for sure, I was convinced by her point of view. I thought that he was cheating on her. And I was like, that asshole, she gave everything up for him. And then he's, wanting to get with this girl. But then John says, no, that's the girl that the mom was kind of forcing on him. And so he was, kind of entertaining her for his mom. And so, when John said that, we were seeing that through her point of view. I kind of completely rethought the movie. And I thought, wait, so all these times I was absolutely 100% on her side, was I only getting her side of the story? And so it sounds like interesting, this Atonement movie kind of gives you both, right? And you get it a little bit later, whereas I think in Anna, you kind of are never quite sure on some things.
Yeah, I think it's very much left open to interpretation with Anna, because I do, my personal opinion with that film is that we're seeing things so much from Anna's perspective, and she's going through a lot. She's, obviously she's been ostracized from society, and to sort of escape from that, she's been on, morphine and all this stuff. And she's just really hurt and scared and doubtful of things. So I think it's perfectly within reason to, to think that it's like in A Song of Ice and Fire, it's the idea of the unreliable narrator, where we're always seeing things from, the person's point of view who we're reading about in that moment, or watching in this case. So I think that is an example of that.
Yeah, and since we kind of are blending into what John calls the Joe Wright trilogy here, I do feel it's pertinent to note that like Pride and Prejudice is an incredibly epic, sweeping story, and the camera really takes you into that. And Atonement is similar. It has its kind of claustrophobic scenes, which plays into the perception, but it's also kind of a grand, sweeping epic. Anna Karenina really is, by design, a very claustrophobic movie, and the big factor in that claustrophobia is the set. The choice to essentially set the movie entirely on this one stage, which I have to admit, the first time I saw this movie, I struggled with it. I did not like that choice at all. It really kind of hindered my enjoyment for the movie. Luckily, as I've gone back and revisited it, I now see the point of it. I appreciate it more and what the director was trying to do. But ultimately, that kind of sense of feeling trapped and all the world's a stage, with the world literally being a stage for most of the movie in Anna Karenina, really does kind of play into what Amy was talking about with the idea of perspective, where Anna feels increasingly trapped and isolated, and like that she can't escape, and nothing seems real and nothing seems true to her, to the point that she ultimately feels that she has no recourse but to escape by taking her own life.
Yeah, and the scene before she leaves to go kill herself, I was actually, John and I were doing a watch party, so we were kind of messaging, and I remember going, if he would just comfort her in this scene, right? She says, is this really happening? Am I basically your only one? Is it just us? Because she gave up everything to be with him. So if he then cheated on her, that'd be crazy, because she gave up so much. And so you could tell that. But then I wonder, now I look back on that scene as that was coming from her perspective. So maybe he was actually not being that dismissive as I saw it, because I really saw it as him being, women, they're hysterical. They think too much. They're paranoid, And so I think it also played a little bit with this kind of stereotype of women overthinking things. And then they turn out to be right, that he really was cheating, which is why I believed that really was it, because I thought that always happens. Men always say, she's just a friend, it's nothing. And then it turns out to be something, right? So I wanted to really believe that it was woman's intuition, and she was right. But now that I look back at that scene, I really think that the paranoia, could have, while it was warranted in some cases, I think ultimately, throwing yourself in front of a train before, just outright asking him, are you really, cheating on me? I think it was really, it seemed melodramatic, but it also seemed like, for her, that was, she had given up everything for him. And so she would rather be dead than, than live a life where he's not with her anymore, basically.
I will say that, sorry, Courtney just asked a question, so I thought about that for a second and I lost my train of thought, but I'll address her point real quick. Yeah, I mean, I get that, and obviously there were a lot of people who had issues, Courtney, with the fact that the film was, very stylistic and chose to tell its story mostly on a stage, basically, except for the stuff that like happens outside of the court, and then we get to open up and actually see the real world. But I think they were making a point about the Russian aristocracy and the way they sort of its way of saying they were living their life upon a stage, basically, and so I think it was a really good creative choice because we've seen endless versions of Anna Karenina. So how were they going to make this one different? And I have to say, I loved it when I saw the movie. Now, full disclosure, I actually haven't read the novel or even seen a previous version. So this was actually the first time I saw the story. But yeah, I thought it was very creative the way they did things. Surprise, surprise, I love the movie. Of course I did. But
I was kind of like Jared, though. It took a while to grow on me, the stylistic choices. But I think what really attracted me first off to the movie was the class commentary. You have her, all done up in very fancy dress, and she's getting onto the train, and she sees a worker who is completely black from the coal, right, from working on the train. And once again, spoiler alert, this is an all spoiler stream. Yeah. She goes into the train and the train lurches and he's essentially run over and torn in half. I mean, it's very gory. So if you look away, if you're a little sensitive about that stuff. And so you have this literally, the aristocracy is literally running over the lower class. I mean, I don't think it can get more obvious than that. And a lot of these movies have class commentary, but I think Anna really stood out to me in that it wasn't just creating situations where you think of class commentary. It was doing this kind of showing how people of the lower classes were subjected to violence and dangerous jobs, and that the rich people never really had to worry about their own, about bodily harm in any way, because they were always the ones on the train and not the ones working on them. And so I think it's not forcing a situation where class commentary comes out. It feels very, very natural. And I like that because I've seen a lot of Marxist movies where the class commentary is very forced. And I read a lot of Marxist theory where it's very forced. And so it's really nice to see, it almost speaks for itself, when you have those kinds of scenes.
And another element of sort of that class commentary is the way we get to, going back to the style of the film, the fact that you get to see all these, workers who are also the stage hands, changing the scenes around so that the members of the aristocracy can just walk around and sit down in their next scene with the new sets. And I really love that there's a scene where I don't know these characters' names as well as with the other films, but Matthew McFadden's character, he plays on his brother, and he is meeting Constantine for dinner, and as they're leaving, his office, then the whole set is being changed. You like I said, you see all the stagehands, moving stuff sort of back and forth, and setting up stuff, and the way the camera moves until you arrive at the restaurant. And I just love the way that whole thing is orchestrated. Yeah, it is very stylistic, and it's, it's making a point of it. But that's sort of what I love about the movie. I think that's part of what attracts me to it. So.
Yeah, and as I said, I came around on it. It was off-putting on first watch, but once I kind of started to understand more what the function of that unique set design was, I appreciated it more, and now I do actually like the creative decision. It usually takes me. Yeah. No, I was just going to say.
Oh.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, with the movement of the sets also comes the sound. There were a couple times I thought it was going to break out into a musical when they were stamping the papers and typing. I was like, all right, someone's going to sing. You know, I really feel like it's a big tribute to plays and musicals as well. You know, you almost feel like it's going to turn into a play at some point. So with the movement also comes the sound, which usually means a musical number is starting. And so I think once I realized it wasn't going to be a musical and it was just a nod to it, then I was like, I'm okay with this then.
Okay, I do know what I was going to say earlier that I forgot about, because we were talking about Bronstery and sort of how, you know, Anna's interpreting, you know, what he's doing and saying. And I was going to say that he doesn't really do himself any favors either. Even if she is misinterpreting some things, he could help her out a little bit, because there's that line of, you know, when he says, I love you, and she says, why? And he says, you can't ask why about love, which sounds like a very poetic.
It sounds like a cop out is what it sounds like.
But at the end of the day, she's looking for something, you know,
yes.
to grab onto. And so that's not the right thing for him to say.
Guys, always comfort your girlfriends. Always tell them why when they ask, why do you love me? You should have many reasons to pick from if you really love someone. You know, you can say things. And so I thought
it's Keira, for God's sake.
I know, I've got 10 things already, you know, and so it kind of felt like she was really looking for that comfort. And it kind of showed how, well, I chose you, right? You left your husband and we're together now. And for him, that was the end of the story. That's all he needed to do. But for her, she still had this anxiety that comes from being a social pariah, right? So she was in, right, when there was the play, and they, you know, this was actually where I think the stylistic choice was paid off, which is where the spotlight was on her, right? She was the widow, you know, not the widow, she was the divorcee, you know, right? And there was that, and they weren't sitting together, her and her lover. And so a woman was talking to the lover and said, you need to marry her, you know, because this is not working. She's, you know, and he says, I love her and I consider her my wife. And she says, you know, that's not enough, basically, which is that woman was kind of expressing the overall views of the higher class, which is that, you know, it doesn't matter if you consider her your wife, you have to make it legal. And even when you do that, she's still a second married woman at the time. I mean, in her second marriage. So she was forever going to be a social pariah. So she gives up all of that for him. And she is basically publicly embarrassed, right? And he doesn't comfort her, really. She cries. Like, you notice that scene where she's crying and he holds her, which is that's what you're supposed to do when someone's crying, is hold them. But you're also supposed to reassure them, right? Yeah. And have a plan moving forward that it's gonna be better. I'm gonna make things better. And he never said how he was going to make things better. It was always, we'll just get through it, baby, which is never a great thing to say.
That scene is, I think I even mentioned this, where, you know, you look at how excited and confident she is going into in that play, and then when she comes back and she's so devastated and torn apart and fragile, and it's just it's so heartbreaking to see that transformation, and it's just a gradual decline.
And it shows the social suicide that women commit to follow their hearts, basically. You know, you have to give up so much, whereas the man is seen as a cuckold, right? Oh, poor him. And she's the bad one, right? Rather than, this is a woman finally finding someone she loves and being happy, right?
Yeah, and especially like the stakes of like really all that what she wanted was love and that passion and that connection, because unlike, you know, her horrid husband in The Duchess, who we lambasted a few hours ago, Anna's husband, Karenina, played by Jude Law in a rather excellent performance, he is not an evil man. He is cold. He doesn't really give her what she needs. This is why she's ultimately drawn to Vronsky. But the film does a good job of presenting his character in such a way where you do feel bad for him. He is quite kind of a, you know, he's a good party man, I guess you could say. And he wants to take care of his wife, but he cannot give her what she needs. And that is really his greatest crime. But even when she wrongs him, you know, he finds it in his heart to forgive her up to a point. And then he ultimately does, you know, he has the cruelty where, just like in The Duchess, you know, he has the power to keep her from her son, which is why you get that incredibly emotional scene where she storms back into her house to comfort her son, who just adores his mother and thinks the world of her. And that's a devastating blow. But ultimately, you know, after the tragedy of what Anna, you know, ending her own life, her husband takes in her son with Vronsky, or her daughter with Vronsky, I should say, and raises him alongside their own son. So you see that he has a decency to him that makes him a sympathetic character, if not exactly a flawless one. Far from it, in fact.
Yeah, he shows character growth. He shows he's capable of being better. And with the Duchess, I felt like the Duke never made any good faith effort to be better. And that scene that you were talking about, Jared, I actually wrote down the exact line that her son said, because I'm not going to lie, it made me tear up a little bit. She says, you know, something like, I've been awful or I've been bad, something like that. Oh yeah, I love Papa. He's better than I am, is what she says. And he goes, Mama, no one is better than you. And that, you know, that really got me, because it's true. Like, no one is better than your mom. Even if she thinks she's a bad woman and she's made mistakes, you always love your mom. And so he, from his perspective as a child, his mother's done nothing wrong. Why is she gone? You know, but to the father, he's had this personal, he feels his pride has been personally attacked, right? And so he has all this resentment towards his wife, but the son has none of that. He just loves his mother. And so I think he's saying the one thing that everyone in this movie should be telling Anna, which is it's important. What you want is what's important, really, right? No, nothing is more important than you, and no one is better than you. And so that really got me, as it's like, you know, from the mouth of babes, right? Like the kids are the ones that are less judgmental and who just love unconditionally. And as long as you give them candy. So I think that really was such a touching scene for me, because that was finally someone told her, you know, that you should do what you want, basically, that no one's better than you. You are a good person. And you can tell throughout the film, she struggles with feeling like if she's a good person or not.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just about to make a point about something, and I
That's
lost.
why I'm writing down my points, because I forget. Yeah. So I'm like, because I can't remember anything.
Yeah. No, and I mean, we don't have to spend a lot of time on these characters, because it is a very Kitty, or I should say Keira-focused stream. But the reason I made that slip was because there is this subplot involving Kitty and Donald Gleason's character, and he basically, you know, he is a very, you know, socially introverted character who just wants to pour his heart out to this woman that he's loved from a distance. And at the beginning, she is, you know, very fixated on the you know, the trappings of high society. She has her eye on Vronsky, and then it turns out Vronsky has his eye on Anna. And there is that moment where Anna is like trying to, you know, encourage the affection between Kitty and Vronsky. And then as soon as Vronsky looks at Anna, she just kind of wakes up in a way. And then, of course, you're off and running. I'm kind of... But,
I don't think we can't not talk about the dance scene, which is just gorgeous.
Best cinematography, I think, in the whole film was that scene.
Yeah, the way
even though it's great cinematography.
It's a combination of great cinematography and choreography, and because as they're going through, everybody else kind of freezes, and so it's just them, and the way the camera sort of, you know, circles around them, especially as Vronsky lifts Anna up, and it's yet another one of those moments. I was sitting in the theater and kind of, you know, mouth dropped open. It was so gorgeously filmed.
Because it really gave you the feeling that they had, which is they were the only two people on that dance floor and in the world when they found each other, you know? And so the rest of the world kind of melts away, and the cinematography really, I think it's very immersive. It really immerses you in the scene.
Yeah, to Joe Wright's staple to have everybody else in the ballroom disappear, going back to Pride and Prejudice.
That is, you know, I mean, if it worked once, do it again. It's not necessarily a one-trick pony, but
no. But just to finish up, I love what you were talking about with the dance, just to finish my point on the kitty, and I believe it's Levin's point of view. Ultimately, after Kitty doesn't get Vronsky, she's humbled, and she ends up, and Levin tries to move on from her, but then they get another chance, essentially, and she ends up, going with him, being his wife, and there's that incredibly moving scene where she helps to take care of his dying brother and the prostitute that he is essentially living with as his wife. And you can kind of see that, unlike Anna, Kitty has escaped. She manages to get out of this kind of claustrophobic trap-in setting and find happiness outside. But which I guess kind of goes into the whole thing about the, I think Levin's character is meant to foreshadow the incoming revolution, and they're going to be on the side of the workers, whereas all these aristocracy are going to be kind of overthrown and consumed.
Yeah, that's the biggest class commentary, because she basically becomes a lower class woman and is happier than when she had servants to take care of her, right? And now she's having to work with her hands and be a caretaker. Yeah, but she looks happier than ever. And I think there's that one point where Constantine goes, and I think it foreshadows that he's going to break up with her, basically, because he thinks she's not happy, right? And he goes and he stops and he sees her with the baby, and she smiles up at him, and it's like he melts. He realizes that, if she really is not going to feel any resentment towards giving up, her high class lifestyle, and she really is happy, then, it's almost like he thought he felt in the end he wasn't worthy. She would wake up tomorrow and realize that this isn't what she wanted. I think when he realized that she did want to genuinely be with him, and like you were saying, being on the side of the workers, right? So I think what was set up with the train scene, where the lower class workers run over by those aristocracy, literally, this is kind of, it comes around and shows that the workers do have agency, and they have lives, and they have families, and and they're going to. It's the foreshadowing of this revolution of workers fighting back against really a higher class that has gotten to the point of just, rich to the point where it's ridiculous and wasteful.
Yeah, I really, what I love, talking about the storyline with Kitty and Constantine is, it really does sort of feel like the antidote to the Anna Vronsky storyline, in that ends so tragically, and then their story is sort of like the uplifting, side of the story. So so we don't walk out of the movie feeling absolutely dreadful. So I think that those two stories strike a wonderful balance, and I think it is the story of these two relationships. Obviously, a lot of the focus is going to be put on sort of the triangle between Anna, Karenina, and Vronsky, but I think that the Kitty Levin story is just as vital to the story overall.
Yeah, this is the first movie that I really remember seeing Alicia Vikander, and she really broke out for me with Ex Machina, but she does a wonderful job with this.
I love that you really foresee her as this sort of angel in the clouds. Yes. The way they have the set behind her and stuff. I think that's funny.
Yeah, and I feel like they're almost parodying a little bit in the beginning when she comes down and, oh, my dear, you've come, right? And the fact that this is also the ones that aren't going to get together, right? That's Vronsky, if I'm remembering correctly, right?
No.
It is, okay. Yeah, so it feels like,
he sees her. He sees her as this, angelic figure.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I love that, and that's where the stylistic choice of using a stage does pay off, because there is that kind of set role of women in opera where they're like, they come out of the clouds and start singing, So it seems to be a huge nod to drama as a genre, which I think is really interesting. And I think I don't remember if it was John or Jared, but one of you mentioned, I think it was John, where it's being in the upper classes at the time, it was like being on a stage all the time. And then Jared's talking about this claustrophobic feeling, right? And that the eyes of everyone is always on you. You're expected to perform all the time, and especially as women, be elegant all the time and be beautiful and never say anything rude, you know, and always have social graces.
Courtney, I wouldn't say the movie has a happy ending. I just mean that it helps you to not feel like you want to slit your wrist going out of the theater, because it
doesn't make me give up on love altogether, which is what I wanted to do at the end of the movie without Kitty and Constantine.
Because it really is. I mean, the ending is very somber. It's not like you walk out of the movie sort of happy because, you know, Anna has committed suicide and it's just dreadful. And the movie really ends with showing that Karenina is, you know, is taking care of her daughter, but it's not really happy. It's just sort of almost, the ending almost feels like a relief in a way. It's kind of to where things have come to an end, and and you have the little bit of hope with Kitty and Levin, but it's still a really tragic story.
Yeah, no, it's bittersweet in classic Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire fashion. It's just that all the bitter, they're separated. All the bitter is on the Anna side of the story, and all the sweetness is on the Kitty and Constantine's side by the end, at least.
Okay, I think we'll stop there because actually there are still two subjects I want to cover, and we've hit the 2-hour mark. Are you guys still game to keep going? Okay, I want to jump back before, because I want to close out with Colette, but let's first jump back to Pirates of the Caribbean, which we kind of breezed past because, you know, I know a lot of people probably haven't seen this one, but you know, but still, we should, you know, present it to the world so some people can.
It's not like it was a major franchise that everyone was talking about in the mid 2000s or anything.
And can I just say that I'm gonna just come out and say it, and you know, I don't care how many people are like, "Oh, John, it's just because you're in love with Keira." She is the protagonist of these films.
Surprisingly, you will hear no arguments from me about that, John. I know you're.
Yeah, because she's one who goes on this great journey, and she's at the center of the action. Obviously, Jack Sparrow is sort of the main attraction of the franchise, but he's the character that doesn't really change over the course. He's the wild card, but he's not really the heart of the story. And you know, you could argue that it's Will and Elizabeth, but I think that Elizabeth is really, because she's the one who starts off. She starts off in that damsel in distress role, and then by the end of the story, she's, you know, the pirate king, and you know, and she's leading everyone, and even the final grace note of the third film after the credits is, you know, focused on her, and you know, and waiting to see Will on, you know, her on, you know, for one day after waiting 10 years, and so I do love that, and I guess we should talk a little bit about the first movie before I jump to going crazy about her big speech in the third film, which I love. But yeah, so just talk about what was your guys' experience seeing this one, because Pirates is such a fun movie, and I think especially the first one is like one of the all-time classic popcorn films.
Oh, I love it. This I can't do it anymore, but at the time, this was one of the few movies that I could recite every single line of dialogue perfectly in order from beginning to end. I knew the movie that well. I loved it that much. It's just a classic rip-roaring adventure story based on a concept that everyone, you know, was rightly suspicious of. The idea that it's based on a Disney theme park ride. Oh, this is so cynical. This is such nonsense. This will never work. Johnny Depp hasn't proven himself as a commercial actor. Orlando Bloom has never done much outside of Lord of the Rings. Who is this Keira Knightley? And what they just brought together is it's electric. The first movie is electric. From the moment it starts to the point where like you just get swept up, like in the classic scene when, say, Will and Jack steal the ship, or when we get the awesome line from Groves and Norrington, "That's got to be the best pirate I've ever seen." So it would seem, but but specifically with Will and Elizabeth, I agree. I think that Elizabeth and Will might be a little bit more co-leads, especially in this first movie. I do think Elizabeth has the bigger arc over the first three movies. But the reason the movie works so well is because of their love story. You believe their love story. The fact that they met as children, he was enamored with her from the first time he saw her. And then there's that absolutely wonderful scene, like right at the beginning, the moment that I really locked into the movie, when he comes to drop off the sword and she comes down the stairs and she's so delighted to see him, and he is clearly so smitten with her, but he can't express that love in front of her father, of all people, given their class disparities. And she just looks at him so sweetly and is like, "Will, how many times must I ask you to call me Elizabeth?" And he says, "At least once more, Miss Swan, as always." And you can just see, like, Keira's acting.
Okay, John sigh all over the place. The way she's smiling and she says, "How many times must I ask you to call me Elizabeth?" It's like, I'm sorry, I'm going all out here. How can you not fall completely in love with her? She's radiant.
I know. Yeah, and I think you're right, Jared, in that it's really, I think one of the reasons I agree with John that she's basically the protagonist, her and Will are co-stars, kind of like you were saying, Jared, is that it's really their story that is driving the plot in a lot of ways. Like, I feel like for Jack, things just kind of happen to him and he reacts, whereas Elizabeth and Will, do things, right? And they're kind of, they move the plot forward in a lot of ways, and Jack kind of feels like he's along for the ride in a lot of in the later movies especially. It's just like, wow, like, he's hilarious, of course, and he's kind of the reason that a lot of people went to go see the movies. But I think the more and more that I watch Pirates, the more I think the less I see him as a really significant character, because even though it seems like it's surrounded, or it's around his story, it really is around Elizabeth and Will's story. And I just have to say, the first Pirates was my bisexual awakening, because I was attracted to Keira Knightley and Orlando Bloom at the same time, and at the time it was confusing, and now it's not. So yeah, I just you see these two people, and they obviously care for each other, and there's the class differences like you mentioned, but there's also this kind of feeling that there's still so much for them to do and grow together. And then you get that through the movies, right? They're going on adventures, and that's how they grow together. And then in the end, even though it's kind of tragic how they're still together, but not really, right? You feel like they went through all of these trials for a reason, right? That they grew as people, and Jack doesn't.
Well, and isn't that kind of what's great about him, though? It's like,
yeah, he's the one constant.
Because he really is in just about the same position at the very beginning of the first film that he is in the final scene of the third film, where he's on his little rinky-dinky boat, and he's come full circle, basically.
Yeah. No, and I agree that we do have to give credit to Johnny Depp, who was Oscar nominated for this performance, which is insane because, as we said, it's a venture movie based on a Disney theme park ride, but it was deserved. It was absolutely deserved. But Jack, he has his own character journey in becoming a bit more selfless, especially over the first three movies. But this really ultimately is Will and Elizabeth's story, as you said, and we're going to talk primarily about the first three. I will just say with the fourth, if you need evidence of that, look at the fourth one, in which Will and Elizabeth don't appear at all, and it's kind of forgettable. and the fifth one where they only have essentially cameos. And I do love the very ending beat at the end of the fifth film, which I do not like much else in that movie. And you can see how they kind of try to recapture the Will and Elizabeth dynamic with the two new characters, and it's just not the same. And it just goes to show that what Keira and Orlando brought to these three movies, it's powerful. You are invested, especially all the way to that absolutely gorgeous scene where he literally gives her his heart, says it's always belonged to you. Will you keep it safe? Yes, yes. And the music in that scene by Hans Zimmer, which we cannot talk about Pirates of the Caribbean without talking about Hans Zimmer. But
oh my God, I know.
Sorry, I think there's
there's a little bit of an echo.
It's weird. The music is really interesting because the first film is actually composed by, I may get his name wrong, but Klaus Badelt. And it's interesting because everybody said he is one of Hans Zimmer's disciples, shall we say.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, when the movie came out, they were like, oh, Hans Zimmer did the music. And it's like, no, it's actually one of his proteges. But it was really funny because there's kind of this unspoken thing that, around film store circles where they're like, usually if it's one of his students, he's involved. Just kind of unofficially, and even the soundtrack says soundtrack overproduced by Hans Zimmer as like a joke. So it really was no surprise when he took over for the sequels, because I mean, of course, and especially once the movies were a big success, they were going to bring in the big guns. And what you were saying about the music in that scene at the end of the third film. What I love so much about the score for At World's End is the fact that it doesn't just rely on established themes. You wrote this absolutely gorgeous love theme, which only appears in the third film. And I think it gives a kind of fresh view of everything for that film. And it's like if the music for the first film feels very much like what you'd expect a Jerry Bruckheimer production to sound like, where it's kind of this aggressive rock and roll action music type score, the third film has this theme that really does feel like a swashbuckling, pirate adventure theme, especially, once they're fighting on the ship and they're getting married at the same time. It really does make it feel like an old school, this swashbuckling, fun movie. And I love that scene. And what you were saying about, sorry, I'm going to ramble for a second. What you were saying about how important Will and Elizabeth are to the story. It's funny because when the sequels first came out, I was like, maybe they shouldn't have gone this route. Maybe they should have had this be more like Indiana Jones and be each film is a new adventure with Captain Jack Sparrow. And maybe that's the route they should have gone. But in the years since, I've really come to realize that what made these movies work was when it was the three of them together and having Will and Elizabeth as the core of the story, because when they tried to do the movies without them later on, it never had that same magic. So they were really important to the story.
I like Kate's comment about playing it in high school band, because I had just tried out and gotten into the symphony in my high school. So I played violin, and that was one of the first pieces we did was Pirates. And we convinced our orchestra director to let us play it every single concert for the next 2 years. Somehow we convinced her that no, it doesn't. Even if people have heard it again, it's Pirates. Everyone will want to hear it again. So that was kind of like our thing at the concert. We would end it with Pirates, because that would always get everyone excited, because the movies were really big when we were playing it. So I love that. Yeah, so it was it's as far as just musically looking at the score, it's I don't want to say flawless, but near perfect, the way that it fits together with the woodwinds, the brass, the strings, the percussion. It's next to brilliant for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, Courtney, you had mentioned that Mike was picking up some sound, I have to let you know that a massive thunderstorms just started where I live. That might be what you heard, and it's fitting because, of course, the third film, takes place. The climax takes place in a torrential driving rainstorm, and right as we were talking about that, cue the rain. So someone up there is smiling on our conversation. Hopefully, it is not Calypso because she's kind of fickle and temperamental, shall we say.
Okay, so let me just next move on to sort of backstory of how I came into the second film, Dead Man's Chest. When this was starting to come out, this was after Pride and Prejudice had come out, and I'm trying to remember. Okay, yeah, it was still before Atonement.
Yeah,
and,
this Dead Man's Chest is 2006, At World's End is 2007, and Atonement is 2007. So
yeah, like I remember getting so excited because I wasn't just looking forward to the Pirates of the Caribbean sequel. I was looking forward to it because it was the next Keira Knightley movie, and I was like, "This is why I'm like so looking forward to this, just for her purely." And I remember when the trailer came out, and there's that bit where it ends with her saying, one of these days you will have the chance to do the right thing. And then he says, I love those moments. I love to wave at them as they pass by. And I just got so excited looking forward to, sort of the chemistry between her and the other actors and getting to really see her do more in this one. And she did, because she was no longer the damsel in distress. She was really taking charge, with this middle film. And yeah, I mean, I don't think that the second and third films are perfect. They have some issues, but overall, when I look at the three films, it's just they are just so much fun, and I love the journey that everybody goes on through the films, and especially her. I mean, it's when we get to that big speech that she delivers at the end of the third film, where she's rallying all the pirates. It's like, that is like, that's my big, one of my favorite big hero, rally the troop, moments. I think she's fantastic, and she really kind of shows up all the other, all the men who are, supposed to be, all these tough guys. And I love the way she delivers the line, gentlemen. And she goes, hoist the colors. It's great. It's big fist pumping moment.
And I think what's interesting, just looking at Jack and how he compares to the other characters, Jack Sparrow, he seems so larger than life. He doesn't even really feel like a real person. And that's what I like about having Will and Elizabeth, right? Is this Elizabeth, right?
Yeah.
Because her name is Elizabeth in multiple things. So, yeah. And the thing is that they're the humans that, that really kind of bring the story down to our level on the real world, right? Because it feels so fantasy with this pirates and he, why is the rum gone? Like, he's so crazy, And so then you have Elizabeth and Will that are kind of, they'll say things that are like common sense, they're like bringing the real world on him. And then Jack is just kind of all in his head and his own fantasy. And so I think it's really an interesting dynamic of the real and the imagined kind of fighting each other.
Yeah, and the movies, like, they get bigger and bigger in scale. I think that some of the criticism of Dead Man's Chest and At World's End comes in the fact that they're just so big and so sprawling that they can feel a bit unstructured, whereas the first one is just tight as a wire. But and they start to get long. The third one's almost 3 hours, but they make use of that space. It's not just all epic set pieces. Like, they use it to essentially flesh out every character. Like, we haven't really touched on, like, say, Norrington, but Norrington has an excellent arc throughout all three of these movies. Cutler Beckett turns out to be a very interesting, intriguing villain, wonderfully played by Tom Hollander.
Can I just say, I laughed out loud when he turned around in the beginning of Dead Man's, because I had just seen him in Pride and Prejudice. I was like, oh God, here we go.
Yeah. and it's a very different character. Like, you wouldn't have thought that he could play intimidating so well, but he does. There's the wonderful subplot with Will and his father, played by Stellan Skarsgård, that's introduced in the second and carries over to the third. And then, of course, Bill Nighy as Davy Jones, which is one of those characters that really serves as, if Jar Jar Binks was the first kind of time a digital character was created on film and with that level of sophistication and technology, and Gollum was another level still, Davy Jones is part of that continuum.
Yeah, he's the next stepping stone. And yeah, I think he's brilliantly done. Like, and I don't want to hit on the point too much where, I said that the films have their issues, because that's just me being honest about a couple of quibbles I have. But in general, I love these movies, and Davy Jones is like a big part of that too, because it's such a brilliantly realized character visually, but also he's just so fascinating, just from a character standpoint. And yeah, Bill Nighy is one of my favorite actors. And a little trivia, I got to find time to talk about this in the future, but Bill Nighy actually voiced Samwise Gamgee in the 1980s BBC radio drama of The Hobbit. And you'd never know it because he sounds so different from how he sounds so innocent in that. Yeah. And Bill Nighy is not known for sounding like an innocent person. But side note, he's fantastic in this. And yeah, and even today, like, years have passed, but I watched the movie and I think the visual effects are still stunning to watch.
And I think no matter what, even if you have quibbles with one movie or another, taken as a whole, it is a franchise that has changed movie history forever, whether you like it or not. Like Jack Sparrow, now later we see a lot more characters like that are just insane, and don't you just love it? So before that, I feel like before this movie, whenever they showed people that were kind of eccentric, right? That's the word you use for people that have money and can be crazy, right? Eccentric characters, right? They didn't usually tend to be necessarily the favorite character. And this is the first time, I think, maybe not the first time, but one of the few times where we get the eccentric character being kind of relatable and lovable, and that people really like that. I mean, they gleamed onto him as the main character, even though we argue vehemently that Will and Elizabeth are sharing that role, right? Because he just stood out so much, and he was meant to stand out. That's why Elizabeth and Will seem so normal, right? It's because he is crazy. And so I think that it's kind of, it created this franchise, not just with the music, and also boosting these actors, and they went on to play more big roles. I think as a franchise, more than anything, it speaks to how fun these movies are and how fun you can make movies like this. And I think in the end, Pirates, even though it was a terrible time and everyone was dying of scurvy and they were criminals, this is a movie where you get to just kind of have fun with piracy.
Yeah. Just one note on...
Nobody has more fun with being a pirate than Geoffrey Rush.
Yeah, one note about Jack that I just want to mention, like, even back when it was just the first film, I remember that point where he and Barbossa are fighting at the end, and they're both going in and out of the light, and and we see them as skeletons and all the stuff, and when Barbossa says, "So what now, Jack Sparrow? We to be two immortals locked in an epic battle till Judgment Day and trumpets sound," and Jack goes, "Or you could surrender." And it's that moment especially, it was like, these are classic characters. Like, I'm never gonna forget who Jack Sparrow is. And I was right. It's like, even back with just that first movie, you could tell that this was going to be a franchise that lived on. And even though I don't really care for number 4 and 5, but as a trilogy, it's definitely one of my favorites, just in terms of pure enjoyment. I even have a wonderful oversized box set of the 3 films. It actually comes in, like, you open it up and it's the code, the pirate code, and all that. Nice. So I'll have to show that to you guys sometime. But yeah, so I cherish these movies quite a bit, and not just because of Keira.
Yeah, just remember that code is more like guidelines than actual rules.
Yeah. I like Lady Leaf's comment about I'm saving up to become eccentric. It's really true. If you don't have money, you're crazy. If you have money, you're eccentric. I love it. Yeah, but I really think that in the end, more than anything, the movies made an impact, you know, on, I think, am I right in saying they're Disney? Or did Disney buy it? Okay. And it was a huge thing for Disney because, you know, this is the era, especially the first Pirates. This is the era that they were really trying to get out of this animated musical era of the 90s, right? They were really wanting to show that they could make, you know, movies with adults and you know, but get it to PG so the kids can see it. But, you know, but be entertaining enough for adults and children to both go see a Disney movie. And I think Pirates, more than anything, accomplished that. And that was a lot of the goal, I think, of what Disney was going for, to try and have how we see them now, which is, yeah, they do animated movies, but they also do more serious, you know, live action movies. So
yeah, it's astonishing to me that this worked at all, though, because it's like you think Pirates of the Caribbean. Now we think of these movies. Back then it was like they're making a movie out of Pirates of the Caribbean.
It's a miraculous. And to build off what Amy was saying, like these movies, the Pirates movies, really bridged, you know, the end of the Disney Renaissance around the turn of the millennium to this was before Disney had Marvel. This was before Disney had Star Wars. Pirates really carried them for a decade. These movies, two of them made over $1 billion at World's End, almost made that, and they were a global smash hit. They were a phenomenon, and they may not have had quite the staying power in terms of just people thinking that, like, oh, this is a franchise that needs to go on and on forever. But as John said, like the first three movies really can be held up with any of the best fantasy adventure trilogies that we have, I think.
Yeah, and of course I will forever be grateful because the movies introduced me to Miss Knightley, so you know, so they would be classic for that alone.
Yeah.
And I think those scenes where she's yelling at men and really standing and telling them what needs to I just love those scenes because these guys cannot keep their crap together, and she's the one that gets their shit together and gets it happening, you know. And that's what I love about her character, is that, like you were saying, you see a lot of independence kind of building, you know, throughout the first movie, and it continues into the you know, and then by the third she's like, you know, badass. So there's also this, whenever she's giving these speeches, and Keira just always gives great speeches, but I remember one where she's kind of hanging off of a mast and she's yelling at them. And that's just one of my favorite, because you can tell, even though she has kind of a quiet voice, you know, she's really putting the passion into it. And I think Keira Knightley, you know, ordering around a bunch of sailors is all I need in my life, really.
Yeah. And she gets to do, like, I mean, we've been talking about kind of her hero's journey, for lack of a better term, throughout these three movies, but she gets to wrestle with some dark stuff, particularly in the second movie. You know, there's the kind of angle of, you know, for as much as Will and Elizabeth are the cornerstone romance of the trilogy, Elizabeth struggles that maybe she would rather be with Jack. Maybe she loves what he represents with the freedom. And it ultimately manifests in that moment where, at the end of the second movie, she, recognizing that Jack needs to die to save everyone else, she changes him to the mast. She leaves him for dead. And that is a dark thing for a hero to do, even if it was a noble purpose, because Jack wasn't going to sacrifice himself. She sacrificed him. And then, you know, you see her, particularly in the early part of the third movie, dealing with really a crushing sense of guilt, which Will misinterprets as her being in love with Jack, but it's like it's actually heavy stuff. It's not an easy ride to become the Pirate King for Miss Elizabeth Swann. So when she ultimately does and gives that rousing speech and then almost loses Will and then gets him back, like, you really feel that she has earned this by the end.
Yeah.
She's earned her right to rest. If she
Especially in contrast to Jack, everything just kind of gets handed to him. And, you know, and she's really worked to become a pirate queen. And he's just, especially in the beginning of the movie, you're like, how did this guy even get this one rickety boat? I mean, how did he even make it this far?
I do love that scene at the end of the second film, though. Just the exchange at the end after, she, closes shut that, and connects them. Manacle, that's the word I'm looking for. And she says, don't you see, this is the only way. I'm not sorry. And then he goes, pirate. It's just, it's great.
And it's like, yes, she is, right? At that point, it's like, yep, she's, yeah. And I think that's what's interesting is that Jack, like you said, John, Jack ends up in the same place at the end of the movie, but she ends up being what he wanted to be, which was this great pirate leader, right? And it's delicate Elizabeth Swann that does that. And I think that's one of the things I love about the franchise.
And I will say that this is one of the things that actually I have a real serious grievance with about the end of number 5, which is why I don't even really count it, because it does appear from her outfit and everything that she's returned to being proper Miss Elizabeth Swann. And no, she's moved beyond that. She's the pirate king at the end of the movie, and maybe she's gone on to other things, but I don't think she's returning to that sort of prim and proper life.
Yeah, her growth should still be there, even if her clothes changes. But I can see why visually it doesn't translate as well, right? If you just watch that movie without just that one and hadn't seen, what she had done, it kind of looks like the moral of the story is women return into your dresses, So but even though we know that's not what's happening, I think that that sometimes, especially, I'm not sure about the pirates, but especially with male writers and producers, sometimes they're a little blind to, what exactly young women would take from this. And I thought that they were going in such a great direction with Elizabeth, and then I think they walked it back a little bit in that movie that you're talking about, John.
Well, and in fairness, that came years later, so it's like, it's very easy for me to just, and it's a cameo, so it's like, I'm like, I don't need to consider that. Just shove that off to the side.
I mean, I like that beat solely for the fact that it tells us that Will and Elizabeth did get to reunite, and that they weren't able, and she had spent 10 years apart, and he had to go back to sea again. And so I do like that they are together at the end of the movie. I think that maybe, Elizabeth doesn't really get much of a chance to express what she's been up to in that brief little cameo. But maybe at the scene at the end of the third movie, when you see her with their young son and Will is returning, she's wearing basically pirate clothes, normal pirate clothes. Maybe if they had put her in that outfit instead of the dress that was more reminiscent of the first movie at the end of the fifth movie, they could have conveyed that she was still in that place without having to, because again, it is a cameo. It is what it is. And like you, John, I mean, the movies are the fourth and fifth movies. I don't say they're non-canon or anything. They're canon. They're part of the story, but they're not what I like. Like I said, the fourth one's kind of forgettable. The fifth one has some stuff I like. It also has some of the worst scenes I've ever seen in a major blockbuster. So I'm not gonna go out on a limb to defend it, especially because Johnny Depp's pretty checked out in the fifth one. You can tell, but
he filmed
I do like that ending beat. But yeah, so I agree that but the beauty of the first three movies is they do kind of stand alone as the pirate as their own trilogy, and the fourth and fifth, they're part of the story. But it's kind of like for me with the Alien franchise, where I really like the first two movies. Some of the other ones are not as, and I don't say that, they're non-canon, they never happened. I kind of hate that about whenever fandom gets in that direction with any franchise. But you don't have to watch movies you don't enjoy. And so if you don't like the fourth and the fifth, just kind of...
I like to say that I don't ignore canon. I just enjoy what I want to enjoy. And so, and that's why I kind of take the larger view of entertainment too. That's why when it comes to, I want to do a whole stream about this actually on Here Be Dragons, where we talk about canon and like, you know, if you don't want to talk about Star Wars, you know, for me, the non-canon, the so-called non-canon stories have just as much relevance to me as anything that's canon. So I'm very much a proponent of, you know, enjoy stories, you know, in the sort of way that you wish, but, you know, but at the same time, don't take a stubborn view of, well, that movie didn't actually happen, you know?
Yeah.
So I do agree with you there.
Yeah, as Han Solo says, it's true, all of it. And as a big sequel defender, I will happily endorse that statement. But I'm not going to force anyone to enjoy movies that they don't enjoy. Like, life's too short. Watch what you watch. Love what you love. Just don't try to oppress other people if they do enjoy that thing.
Anyway, so we've kind of gone off on a little bit of a tangent here, but it's all good. Is there anything you guys want to still say about Pirates?
I mean, we could talk. There are other things to talk about, but I think that we've covered at least the Keira Knightley parts of it pretty well. So we can move on if you like, John. It's up to you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So now it's funny because there were other. I remember when I was putting this together, I was like, we can, you know, mention other movies besides just what's on our main list, but we've had so much fun talking about just the main items. So we're just going to make sure we fit in the last, you know, main film that I've picked out for us to talk about, which is a more recent one, which is the 2017 film Colette.
Yes.
Which is a remarkable film, and not enough people have seen it. It's
absolutely,
and the film was so great, but it wasn't even submitted for any Academy Award nominations, which is ridiculous.
I will die on this hill. Queer cinema does not make it into the Academy because of homophobia. I think that is a lot of it. I really do, because there have been just amazing queer films out there. Nessie, is it time for love, actually?
Don't worry.
We'll hit that in the lightning round. We'll hit that. We'll do a lightning round.
Yeah.
And also, I guarantee you guys, if nothing else, that is going to be a Christmas stream. I promise you.
Yes, that is a Christmas movie. It is not it's a rom-com. It's a Christmas movie that happens to be a rom-com. That's how I feel about Love Actually. I watch it every year for Christmas. But sorry, back to Colette. But I really do think that there is a bias against queer cinema. It just makes people feel icky, and they're not as comfortable with it. They don't see it as art in the same way that they see heterosexual relations being and love stories being told. And I think what I really like about Colette, so for those of you who haven't seen it, Colette she's a good writer, and her husband is an author, but he can't write for crap. So he has her write and then publishes it under his name. And so the whole movie is a lot about her getting what her talents have produced, getting it back and owning her own writing and breaking away from her extremely controlling husband. And there's one scene where he locks her in the room and says, write, and he won't let her out until she has written something. So there's, she has such control over her life. And I think what's interesting is that it's a feminist movie. It has a lot of feminist commentary, but I think one of the best things that it really comments on is female authorship and female readership. So it showed when she talks to her husband, about writing things, under her name, he says, women writers don't sell. That's a direct quote from the movie. So there's this idea that just like James Tiptree Jr., which is one of the most famous science fiction writers, is a woman named Alice. She had to change her name or have a male pen name, so that people would take her literature seriously and that they would pick it up off the shelf in the first place. So he's basically telling her, if we put your name on this, it wouldn't be selling like hotcakes like it is. And yet the one who is buying these stories, are mostly women, and the surprise of the publisher that women are reading. So, there's this it's like these men are finally waking up that, women, high class women especially, have been reading for generations, and they've been in basically an untapped, customer base, basically. And when they see that, so the story is about women, written for women, and women, are consuming it, but she can't put her female name on it, right? And so I think that that's really interesting, is that there's this constant commentary on female authorship. What is it worth? Does it sell? And then also female readership. Is it valid, right? What he mentions, I know what men want to read, so I should be the one reading your manuscripts before they get, this assumption that the reader base is mostly male, which is an erroneous assumption, I think.
But he's flat out told that's not the case by his publisher.
Yes, exactly. And so the movie is really playing with this idea of perception versus reality, right? And so I look specifically at women's literature in China in the early 1900s, and I always have to make the argument in my papers that women were reading this, women were writing, and there's such a patriarchal assumption that that women aren't engaged in literary pursuits, which, as a writer and a literary critic myself, who is a woman, and exactly right, Nessie. This is also brought up in Little Women, because you have one of the, the whole story is a book that has been written by one of the girls. So you really have this female authorship and readership, but then also another major theme, which of course we can talk about, is queer love in general. What does it mean for two people that are not in a heterosexual relationship? What does love mean for them? And even if it's valid for them, and true for them, how society will not recognize it that way. So you actually have her husband agreeing essentially to her dalliances with other women, and quite frankly getting turned on by it, if you see in the movie. And he also has this, I want to call, fantasy role-playing thing with the main character of the Claudine, the main character of the book that Colette writes. He meets this younger girl, and he calls her, when they get together in bed, he calls her Claudine, and she acts like Claudine. And you can tell that he's actually sexually attracted to can any of us relate? Sexually attracted to a fictional character, right? And that he really wants to sleep with Claudine, but he's married Colette, and Colette is Claudine, right? So there's this weird thing of it'll never really be enough for him, because he wants this woman in fiction. Colette writes it from her own experiences, but she changes things, right? And so I think that that's also really interesting, that there's this kind of weird, I think, warped sexuality on the part of the husband, and that he gets turned on by his wife walking out on him with other girls. Kate. And also he has this really obsession, with role playing, trying to get women he sleeps with to act like Claudine.
Yeah, and it really, he wants to control her. He feels like he owns her, and she owns, and she owes all of her success to him. But the thing is, one of the reasons why he is attracted more to Claudine than he is to Colette, his very vibrant wife, is because Claudine is fictional, and at least at a remove, and so he feels he can project onto her. Whereas with Colette is her own person. She has her own desires and wants that she is not willing to conform to his very narrow view of what she should be and what a woman should be. And ultimately he pays for it, because he comes to realize that she doesn't need him. And she realizes that too. There's a stretch throughout the movie where she ultimately, she decides she doesn't want to write anymore. And why would she? She's proven that she's written these excellent books, even if she hasn't gotten credit for them yet. She wants to act.
And it's not enjoyable for her, just because of all the because of the experience she's had, being controlled by Willie, and so it's just, and of course by the end of the film, once she's out from under his grip, she does learn to find that joy again, because she starts writing again.
Yeah, and I also think what's interesting too on that also is, dang, I lost my thought. I should have written it down. I was telling John to write things down, and then I forgot to. I'm sorry, it'll come back to me.
Yeah, no, but the film really does, it's challenging in those ways, not only in the way that it deals with, the way the men are trying to control women, but also in the sense, it's a very progressive film in the way it deals with with trans issues as well, with the character of Missy. And earlier, what you had kind of mentioned, Amy, about the Academy not really responding to, queer cinema. There are instances where it has broken through, where, Brokeback Mountain, Call Me by Your Name, Moonlight, even won Best Picture, but those films are male queer films. Whereas John just talked about Carol last week on the stream. That was a film that was famously did not get in for Best Picture. And this is very similar because it deals with issues surrounding queer women. So, but
actually,
it's really kind of old.
Let me interject because I actually wonder if that might not have fed into it, because the real crime here with this film is not just that it was ignored by the Academy, but that the studio didn't even submit it for consideration. Yeah. And so did they do that because they saw what happened with Carol and said, well, that was so high profile and it still didn't get, the top, the Best Picture and Best Director nominations. Should we even bother with this film, which is lower on the radar, so to speak? But, it could have been even bigger if they pushed it. So that for me is what's the most disconcerting, is not that the Academy, sort of saw it on like a short list and said, no, we're not going there. It's that the studio didn't even bother.
Yeah. And that's a part, I think, of trans and queer invisibility too, put it up, all they can say, they can't ignore it. Right. But then you can say it was the Academy's fault. Right. And so, yeah, I think you have a really good point there, John. And also kind of going back also to what Jared was talking about, Missy, this trans character, what's really interesting is Willie says, words are masculine and feminine, and there isn't a word for Missy. And I just love that because we have that now, and it may not be a perfect word, but we have the word trans, right? But back then, this is supposed to be the early 1900s, no one had ever seen a woman dress and act like that, like a man, right? And seem, kind of, like not necessarily masculine, but definitely not feminine. It really freaked people out in the movie. And I think that one line really encapsulates the kind of the misunderstandings and the just complete lack of, it seems unconscionable to people at the time that anyone would even want to be like that. And we, of course, now know that it's not a matter of want, it's a matter of feeling. Right, that you are not a cis woman, right? It's not about choice. But I finally remember what I wanted to ask you guys. Where he talks about money all the time. You have to keep writing because we need money. Where is the money going? Is he just spending it like crazy? Because it sounds like they were making a killing off of this book. And literally every other scene is him saying we need more money. And she always asks, where's the money going? And he just swerves left and never answers. He always avoids that question. He always talks around where the money's going. So is it spending on sex workers? Like, where's all the money going?
She does have that line where she says, you always insist on paying for, everything, the gambling, the casinos. So she does kind of lay it at his feet for them always being money.
And see, even though she's earned that money, it's her money, it's her writing, and yet he's able to spend it, without a care, it seems. And if he were actually making that money, he might see it differently. He didn't have to put in the sweat, tears, and ink into it, Yeah. And as a writer myself, like, I just can't imagine someone else publishing my writing, right? It's so personal to you. You put your soul into it. And so it was really one of the reasons that she stopped writing and didn't like it is because, she was bearing out her soul and no one really knew. It makes so much more. Claudine it means more when you know that these experiences of women are written by a woman, And the reason that the readers attach themselves to Claudine so much is because she felt so real, because she wasn't written by another white guy.
Yeah. And, Willie has that one, where Colette says, you always insist on picking up the check. And Willie says, it's expected of me. And it's because it's all part of his fantasy of being a great man, a great society man, a lavish entertainer. That's what he really values, not the creative output that Colette and his other writers are producing.
Yeah, because his whole thing is he has what he calls, his factory of writers. So he, he does some editorial stuff, but all his stuff really seems to come from other people. And to his credit, he actually was, he could write, and he became less able to do so as the years went on, probably because when you're out of practice, that's what happens. But yeah, I love the line where, he's talking with one of his, factory workers about, this novel they're going to do. And the guy's like, who's going to write this novel? And he goes, well, you are. It's like, duh.
Yeah. And he feels and the reason he feels such misplaced ownership of these ideas is why he can do what he does at the end of the movie, when he decides that after the failure of Colette's play, he's going to sell off the rights to all the Claudine books for a pittance. And he feels that he can do that just because he has this mistaken sense of ownership. But that is the straw that breaks the camel's back for Colette. It's not the myriad infidelities which she comes to tolerate, if not even outright accept. It's not the wanton spending. It's not even that he had been taking credit for her work. It's the fact that he feels that he can just give this away, this part of her that she poured onto the page, and that now it's gone. And so now that is where we get into that absolutely incredible speech at the end of the movie, where she essentially lays into him.
Yes, I was just about to read that word for word in my notes, Jared. I love it. She says, you just say I'm a man and I do what I want. I paid you back 1,000 times. Those books were all we have, and then, talking about selling the rights, basically. And he didn't tell her. She found out from someone else. And then he says, those were me, my thoughts and my opinions. I'm ashamed of the time I spent writing scenes to please you. And Claudine is dead. I've outgrown her. And that is perfect. Just exactly all the grievances, everything, her growth. It's all shown in that one speech towards the end of the movie brilliantly.
I know I went on and I said that, the scene from the Duchess is my favorite acted of hers. This is a extremely close second, but the speech itself is my absolute favorite of hers. It's remarkable. Just chills watching this scene. I'm and again, it goes back to what I was just saying about the awards. It's not even submitted. How can you watch that scene and be like, oh yeah, by the way, she wasn't nominated this year. It's just a tour de force. And that speech is just brilliant and you feel it so intensely. It's undoubtedly the best scene in the film and one of my favorite scenes of hers, period.
And Lady Leaf also has a good point, which is that a lot of times cross-dressing in these societies so that women could, with Mulan, right? So that she could join the army. She had to cross-dress as a man, but that doesn't make her trans. And what I love about this movie is Missy is undoubtedly trans. This is how she feels. This is how she mentioned, I think she was talking, So Missy was talking to Colette and she said, I didn't feel like myself until I tried on my brother's trousers, right? She really realized that this is who she wanted to present herself as, because that's how she felt inside. So that's what I really liked about this movie is it didn't play on the woman cross-dresses to get what she wants. Then when she gets what she wants, she goes back to being a woman, right? It was a genuine love story between Missy and Colette. And it comes later because originally Colette has kind of an affair with this woman from Louisiana who I don't know if she's originally Southern, because that was not a good Southern accent. I just have to say right now.
No,
I don't know.
I do remember some criticism about that.
I'm from the South, and that's not how. No, it was a little overdone. Even for a Louisiana accent, it was overdone.
I felt like it was kind of a, probably not purposely, but kind of a cliche Hollywood version of a thick Southern accent.
Yeah. So, but with that, you never felt like they were in love necessarily. They just liked each other. But when you have Missy, they're on the train. Missy's kind of half asleep, and Colette is sitting there looking out the window, and she looks over to Missy, and she mouths, "I love you." And, you know, just a couple of scenes before, Missy had said, "I love you," and Colette didn't say it back. So then when she, without being prompted to, says it, you know, that I teared up a little bit. That was really touching, because it's so rare to see a trans, and, you know, we're not quite sure what to call Colette. I don't know if she's a lesbian, a bisexual, she's somewhere on the scale somehow. And so to see a trans woman and a queer woman, you know, have that relationship. And what's interesting is in the end, you find out with the title cards, notice it says they were together for years later. It doesn't say they were together forever. So there is an assumption that they break up at some point. But in that moment, they love each other so much. And all of the pain that Colette has, you know, all the trauma that she suffered from her husband can start to heal.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, Amy. I feel like we need to put this out there just because it's, I feel like someone may address it otherwise. And also because there's a relevant scene in the movie where, you know, Miss Colette is talking with Willie about about Missy, and he's referring to her as she, like, I don't know what she is. And then Colette very deliberately starts referring to Missy as he. He said this, he said that. And the only reason I bring that up is, one, because it's a very important scene in the movie, and also just because I do feel that we're talking about this character of Missy, we should probably use the pronouns that he would prefer.
Yes, you're right.
Absolutely,
as a
Jared.
trans man.
That was a good. Yes, thank you, Jared. That was, and for anything, it's a slip of the tongue, but yeah, we absolutely.
Yeah, and I think also just because of I think why I may have mistakenly done that is because Missy is played by a straight actress, so was probably approaching it from talking about the actress, you know. And so, but yeah, you are right, and the characters definitely he, and I love their whole story though. It's beautiful, and then of course we have that scene in the Moulin Rouge, which is actually really happened.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. What I liked about that is that, to me, if I were looking at what is, you know, I found wrong with it, it's that it was kind of Orientalist, and that she was doing all this belly dancing, you know, kind of Egyptian, Middle Eastern blended kind of dancing. And I was like, oh, you know, that's nowadays that would be like, they're cool with it, but nowadays that would be like, oh, you know. And then all of a sudden a woman with pants, you know, comes on and starts dancing Missy, and he, you know, kisses Colette. And then all of a sudden everyone's up in arms, and it's like, how dare you? And it's just, you know, it really shows how, you know, certain things were normalized then, and other things even now are seen as queer, weird, right? Different. And so I think I really liked that, and that they really put themselves out there and told society, you know, Colette and Misty told society, we don't care what you think. We love each other, and this is how we're going to express ourselves. I think more than anything, that's what makes it a really good kind of addition to queer cinema as a genre, because you have characters that feel real and are also queer and trans, and you don't always get that.
And I do want to point out, because I mentioned this when we were doing the watch party, and I absolutely love this, the fact that there's a scene earlier in the film where Colette is speaking to a husband and wife who Willie then, you know, is suspicious of, you know, the husband, and in that scene, those two characters are played by two trans actors, which I thought was just phenomenal, especially for this film, what it's about. And I think that was a really wonderful and important thing for the director to do, especially since just as far as representation goes, because especially since you have Colette and Missy being played by straight actors. I think it's important to, you know, make sure that you're giving those opportunities to trans actors when, you know, it's such a big element of this film.
Definitely. Any other thoughts on Colette?
You have anything else, Amy?
No, I think I talked about most of what I wanted to talk about. I think this quickly became my number two, a lot because of the storytelling. And I also think, you know, we mentioned music with a lot of the other movies. And there's a scene where it's right after Willie gets with this girl who he tells to pretend to be like Colette. And this is right before she meets Missy. And there's just, I think, this full symphony piece with a piano in it and a violin solo that really gets me. And I think that the music also kind of tells a story as well in this movie. And so that's another reason I was mad that it wasn't submitted to the Oscars, because I also think that the score, they could have taken a look at that too. It was because it's really good.
Yeah, and shout out to the composer, Thomas Adès, or I'm sure I might not be pronouncing his last name correct.
Oh yeah, I think it's French, so it'd be a day. You would not pronounce the S?
Yeah. He is actually a classical composer. He is not.
I can hear that in the score.
A film composer, and I loved it, especially since, I mean, granted, for a period piece, you'd expect something more classical in style anyway, but so many films these days are sort of electronic scores, and I just loved sitting down with a soundtrack and hearing it in the film music that is done by someone who actually composes, proper classical music, and it's a beautiful score and really sort of punctuates a lot of moments throughout the film.
And it feels like a classical score, when I play violin. And so when I'm playing something like Pirates or Beauty and the Beast, right, it feels like a play score or a movie score. But I kind of looked up the sheet music for this. I wasn't able to get it without a watermark, but I was able to kind of look at the music itself, and it's definitely, it's tight like a classical score. It feels more like Bach or Beethoven or Chopin rather than these modern composers such as, I know this isn't going to mean anything, but such as like Gustav Holst or something like that. It feels classic and classical, but also a movie score at the same time. So I think it blended the best of both worlds, and it really got my attention, obviously, as a player of classical music. And anytime a violin gets a solo, I'm always happy. So, which is a lot, because violin's the best instrument, we all know.
I do really want to say, because I think I've done a reasonably good job of restraining myself for the stream. So I will say, with this film, this is another movie where I know Keira had taken a couple of years off, because I think she had given birth shortly before this, so she wasn't in a lot of movies. So Colette was kind of the one. I remember it premiered at a big film festival early in the year, but it wasn't going to be released until like late October. And so I was definitely going through the year as a fanboy, being like, oh God, when's this movie going to come out? I want to see Keira on the big screen again. So this was so fun for me to go see in theaters, and I really soaked up the experience. It's one of her absolute best, and it's completely acknowledging my biases. It was my favorite movie of the year.
And I also think for Keira being, unless I know something that you don't, a heterosexual woman, I think she did a really good job in those scenes. It felt natural. It felt like she was attracted to the other person. So she was able to act, sexual attraction to females, even if she may not personally have that. So I thought it might be her only queer role, now that I think about it. That was a little bit, probably for her at first, perhaps a little bit difficult, but I think that she did a really good job in the movie, and it felt, not to say that a queer person wouldn't have done a better job necessarily, but to me it felt genuine. It didn't feel like a hetero actor doing their best and kind of stumbling as trying to be queer. And I think also what I found interesting about this movie is that they never really hinted at the fact that she was necessarily attracted to men or her husband. She does come off as most likely lesbian, but they never really fully come out with it, even though what Missy is kind of a little bit more obvious. And so I kind of like that it's also left up a little bit honestly, when I first watched it, and this could be, me being just a kind of pessimistic bisexual of, she's just playing a hetero playing around. She's just experimenting. But then when I saw that, it was really, and then when she met Missy, I think it's when she realized it was more than just, I have a thing for one woman or the other, but that I'm actually attracted to women and in Missy's case, trans men. So am I trans? Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm sorry. And I think I liked that, and that Missy, his identity was a little bit more straightforward. But with Keira's character, it was a lot more stumbling around and finding herself.
Yeah.
Which is a lot more what it's like. So. And
I remember, I do want to say, like, I was so excited when, because we first started talking about, when Keira movies in general, when we were in the Slack and you said, "Oh, I love Keira too," and then I was like, "Have you seen Colette?" And you're like, "No." I'm like, "No, you have to see this. You're gonna love it. I know you will." And it's like,
I know, but I told you, like, my movie knowledge ends at like 2015. I don't know what it was. I've always been a show person, but after 2015, I just was like, I've seen all 15 seasons of Supernatural. Like, I watch shows. So John is slowly but surely making me a movie person, and I am very grateful for it.
It's so funny because everybody in Slack is like, "John's making me watch all these movies," and it's like, yeah, apparently, it's my personal crusade to turn everybody into a movie buff, which I am fine with that label. That's fine by me. But yeah, so yeah, Jared, did you want to comment on anything else with Colette?
No, I feel like we did a pretty good job, or I would say I think Amy really took the lead on this one, and I was happy to sit back and listen to her talk.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
well, thank you for the point about using the right him, her, him, his pronouns, though. We do, we want to be cognizant of that, absolutely, because even though it's just a character, if Missy were a real person, we would want to call him what he wants to be called.
And actually, Missy was a real person.
Yes, that's true. That's true. So, yeah, it is based on a real person. Yeah. So so at the time, I'm sure everyone called him her, but we as contemporary woke-ish people can call him what he wants to be called.
Yeah, I just wanted to, like, I may have even slipped up myself once there. I just wanted to get it in with that, as a physician, that is important to me to call people by the terms, the pronouns they prefer to be identified with. And given everything's in the news, we don't need to talk about that. But I felt I felt we should spare ourselves some comments.
This is in reference to me making everybody. This is in reference to me making everybody watch movies. So
yeah, we're all among friends here. I just wanted to make sure that we were inclusive to anyone else who may be watching.
I do want to apologize to anybody. I know we're going over 3 hours at this point, and Robert's currently doing his stream, which obviously you should choose over my small little channel. He's wonderful, but I think we are wrapping up, so that's good. For those of you, I'm like so humbled that there's still a steady number of people watching live, so thank you for that, guys. We'll wrap up. I just want to mention, we talked before, we have our, we'll call it an official fan club, the Knights of Keira, and we actually do have a Twitter account, which is Knights of Keira. You'll find the link in the description. So, if you, if you love Keira and you love her movies, go ahead and follow us. I'm trying to get Amy and Jared to go ahead and post stuff at their leisure too, because I've given them access to the Twitter account so that so they can post their thoughts and stuff. And yeah, Courtney, I could absolutely talk Keira for days, which is why I said to them, I was like, we're probably gonna go 3 hours, if not more.
Mission accomplished.
Yeah, and I'm actually quite pleased that I managed to not just spend the entire time fawning over her. I got to
You did
actually.
way better than I thought you would, John. I thought half of what you would say would just be sighs.
It's a really big job.
It is 5 o'clock now. It is 5 o'clock somewhere. So drink, everyone.
Yeah, this is the thing. I think maybe we need to. I am not going to terrorize Sanri with another commission, but at some point, I think we should definitely get, a sigil or something.
And for all those listening, KOK. It's Knights of Keira, KOK. We do not call ourselves Cox, okay? It's KOK.
Yes, thank you, Nancy. I very
She had
much
the hose
appreciate
after ready, though. She was ready.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just trying to behave myself so that if there's anybody like outside of our group that's actually watching, they won't be like, wow, this guy's got
I'm never
problems.
watching this guy's videos again because he's insane.
But you know what? We're at the end, so I'm just going to say, like, yes, I've been head over heels, enamored of Keira for about, I guess it's been about 15 plus years now. She is phenomenal. She's my favorite actress. And yeah, she's just, I'm going to go ahead and let it out. She is insanely beautiful. And I love her movies and look forward to all the stuff she still has coming out in the future. And I want to thank you two guys. I said it before, but it's been such a joy getting to sort of really embrace my fandom over Keira and stuff, and we've had so much time watching movies, and I know we're going to be watching a bunch more in our watch parties. And by the way, anybody in the chat, if you guys aren't in our the Here Be Dragon Slack group, go ahead and send either me, Nessie, or Steven a message, or I'm trying to think. We have an email address now. I believe it's we3dragons@gmail.com. So feel free to shoot us an email as well. It is invitation only. So it'll be up to, sort of the three of us deciding, we're going to be very territorial over it.
Exclusive.
Yeah, it's so exclusive. But yeah, just go ahead and ask us, and then we can get the ball rolling there. I know we've invited, beyond just people who tune in, a couple of our friends are in there too. It's a great group. It's, I've had so much fun getting to know everybody. So,
and for those that don't know the Slack, John, I could give just a quick for exactly what it is, just real quick. So it's nothing with, I know a lot of people were confused thinking they had to be on camera. That's not a thing. We do plan Zoom calls, but you can be off camera if you want. So there are channels on this on the menu, and each of them have a name, and it's kind of what the subject of the channel is about. So we have a Tolkien channel, we have a Harry Potter channel, we have a Well of Thirst, which is just all the thirsty pictures and alien and the emojis of the alien, thirsty alien, which is pretty much all I use. So we have pretty much anything you're interested in, hands down. Someone else, if not a lot more than someone else in the Slack, is also interested in it. So we talk a lot. What I like about the Slack is you can mute certain channels. So if you're not interested in one thing, but you're interested in another conversation, you don't have to have it buzzing at you. But yeah, that's where we plan all of these watch parties, and that's where we plan the Zoom hangouts. And it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess that's it. Just one last thing, if you guys either want to go ahead and repeat some, what you've got going on for people who maybe weren't here at the beginning. I know, Amy, if you want to talk about your blog, maybe.
Yeah, so my blog is asoifchineselit.wordpress.com. So ASOIAF chineselit.wordpress.com. And like the title says, I focus on Chinese literature and non-Western imagery. I'm hoping to bring in a little of Hindu mythology, but kind of looking at some parallels and kind of what George is doing with some of these symbols and what it could mean if we looked at it through more of an Eastern kind of lens. And I think there's a lot to discover there, actually. So I'm very excited. So my first essay should be out in a couple of weeks. So follow me on Twitter because I definitely will announce it there. And if you don't use Twitter, my blog has my Twitter feed on the front page, so you can follow along there as well.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm not a hashtag content creator. I'm a family physician, but I do have my Twitter account at @jkozel where I share my musings about Star Wars and Game of Thrones and whatever other stories I'm watching or feeling like talking about. And in that vein, I know we had mentioned the lightning round. I just want to kind of rattle off a few other recommendations for people who might be looking for other Keira Knightley movies to watch. We focused on about a half dozen here today, and I think they were the ones that we had the most common ground with and thought were the most beneficial to discuss. But just a few that I would recommend would be, we talked a lot of period Keira Knightley films. I feel like she is the period queen that was appropriate. Some more contemporary films would be Begin Again, which is a lovely 2013 film also starring Mark Ruffalo, in which Keira Knightley proves that she can sing and is actually quite good at it.
Is there nothing she can do? Oh my God, she's amazing.
Yeah, and Laggies, which is by the late Lynn Shelton. That's another great film with also starring Chloe Grace Moretz and Sam Rockwell. A Dangerous Method from 2011 about Sigmund and Freud and Carl Jung, and Keira's character Sabina Spurl-Rain, which is about the birth of psychoanalysis with Viggo Mortensen and Michael Fassbender. King Arthur, we mentioned, that's just a fun women with bows and arrows where she plays Guinevere. The Imitation Game, that's not a movie I'm particularly enamored with, but I do feel like we should note it because it is the movie that got her second Oscar nomination. It is more of a Benedict Cumberbatch vehicle, but it is worth checking out for Keira's performance as well. And of course, I would not be me if I did not recommend that we go back to the film that started it all for us and for Keira, which was Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, as Sabe, and then go read Queen's Shadow, Queen's Peril, and the Star Wars comic series where Sabe makes her triumphant return.
yeah, that's a big thing. Like, God, we could go on and on talking about that, but we are going to wrap up. That I am forever indebted to author E.K. Johnson because she has turned Keira's, decoy role in The Phantom Menace, where she doesn't have that much to do, into such a wonderfully fully fleshed out character in both Queen's Shadow and Queen's Peril. So please read those books. They're fantastic, especially if you're fans of the prequels and Padme and especially of Keira, because Sabe is a protagonist in those novels. And as far as I want to say again, definitely check out A Dangerous Method. It's one of my favorite performances of Keira. We didn't get to talk about it today, but it's one where she really puts herself out there. She made a lot of decisions for that performance that were sort of deemed by some people, I think, as over the top, but they're very authentic to someone who was, going through what she was going through, as they named it in the day, hysteria and all that stuff. But it's a powerful performance, and she's utterly fantastic. And
I haven't seen that movie yet, so I want to watch it. But I do just want to say one thing about Freud is I have read Freud, and it is very sexist. So I definitely want to see this movie and see how they show the birth of, you called it, Jared, psychological analysis. And I call it patriarchal psychological analysis, because hysteria literally comes from the history, right? Like your hysterectomy, right? Your uterus, right? It is your hormones that are making you crazy. So I definitely want to check that one out. So I'm actually glad we didn't talk about it, because I would have just I haven't seen it, but I would still be saying dang patriarchy the whole time. So. And
I will say, I never thought in a million years that Viggo Mortensen would play Sigmund Freud. So that was really interesting to see. And, some other titles were mentioned, but I'll just throw out a mention of what is one of her most recent films, which is called Official Secrets, where she played, analyst and Catherine Gunn, who, worked for the British government, who basically, leaked documents about, stuff dealing with the Iraq War, and that, the U.S. and British governments were basically blackmailing, officials and stuff to get a green light for war. And it's a fantastic film, especially if you feel like all you ever see in Tyrion are period pieces. And I guess you could technically say this is a period piece since it doesn't take place in present day, but still, it's pretty modern. And she's phenomenal in it, just absolutely fantastic. So yeah, and I guess that wraps things up. Once again, you guys can find all of our information down in the description. Next week, Amy and I will be back with our good friend.
I know you couldn't get enough of that feminist analysis. I'm bringing it back next week.
Yeah, we'll be talking about Little Women. It's going to be fantastic. And then the week after that, there's a Tolkien surprise. So look forward to that one too. You guys, this was so much fun. I'm so pleased that this is like the longest stream I've ever done. It's over 3 hours.
It was going to be. It had to be. I'm so glad that the Knights of Keira made their debut.
Yeah, it's so great. And, and I didn't look quite as bad as I thought I might coming out of this, or at least I hope not. So, so it's all good. And we had a fantastic time. And so thank you once again for coming. And, obviously, Amy, you're coming back, but Jared, you're welcome back. And not just for Keira discussions. If there's anything else you want to discuss, just let me know. Maybe we can do, because I haven't really done any Star Wars discussions on the channel, so maybe we can do something with that.
Okay,
that'll be fun.
We'll talk.
Okay, so that's it. So I will say good day, and I will close off just by saying farewell, my brave hobbits.
The road goes ever on.